public session, Thomas. Thank you. So the main items today will be a briefing from the mental health champion on mental health issues in schools, and an update on recommendations of the PAC report on special educational needs from DE officials. So just remind everyone to switch off their phones. That advised members of the committee meetings will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. We have apologies from Cara, from Nick, and from Gary Middleton. We had hoped to welcome Gary here today, but since he's not here, we'll welcome him next week, I'm sure. Anyone, any interest they wanted to declare? No, we're taking Siobhan now.
Yeah, so the mental health champion has got a full schedule, and the committee agreed that it would try to facilitate her.
Okay. Michelle, if you want to take your seat, and Nicole.
So just if
we're ready to take you now. We'll defer other business until after we hear from the mental health chamber.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, I have a meeting with CMO, and it's kind of tricky for time, so thank
no
you.
problem whatsoever. So you have up to 10 minutes to make a presentation, Siobhan. So the floor is yours, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, super. So I provided you with a written briefing, so this is kind of like a shorter version of that, if that's okay. So I always start with statistics. So the statistics I'm going to start with are on the mental health of young people in Northern Ireland from the 2022 Young Persons Behaviour and Attitude Survey, which found that wellbeing in 14-year-olds had declined to its lowest ever level, and girls had even lower scores than boys. The 2025 Life and Times survey showed that 39% of 16-year-olds had fair or poor mental health. But when we look at the screeners, the questions that detect mental illness, the stats are even worse. I'm afraid it's 45.4% of 16-year-olds having a probable mental illness, over half of girls and a third of boys. So Education committee is really important to this, because education is a setting where mental health can be promoted through whole school wellbeing programmes, mental health in the curriculum, and then focused wellbeing support for young people as well. So the benefits of promoting wellbeing in schools include the higher educational achievement, academic achievement, reduced absences, exclusions and disciplinary issues. Mental health programmes also lower demand for one-to-one SEN support, and the interventions lead to improved employment prospects and reduced costs in health as well as justice. So universal social and emotional learning within the curriculum brings the highest economic gains. It facilitates positive relationships, reduced disruptive behaviour, engagement in learning, and improved cognitive and academic performance. In the UK, the gains are estimated to be around £5 for every pound that's invested in social and emotional learning, and there's evidence from other countries that that might actually be much higher. So in Northern Ireland, our Department for Education and Department for Health jointly launched the Children and Young People's Emotional Health and Wellbeing and Education Framework, and that was back in 2021. The framework is a delivery mechanism for our wellbeing programmes alongside the Education Authority's HOPE school counselling service. So I'm going to provide the committee with an update on the framework and on social and emotional learning and the curriculum. So the Northern Ireland Curriculum Review recommended the development of a new resourced area of learning called Employability and Wellbeing. The content of the speeches in the launch left me in no doubt that this was referring to social and emotional learning, and I saw this as a really positive step, although I do have reservations about the inclusion of employability in that. The Department's response is that the Curriculum Task Force will consider this recommendation further, because the approach risks conflating two fundamentally different educational purposes. And I've been assured that I will have an opportunity to contribute to this when it commences. So I think that's, that's all very kind of positive. It's going in the right direction. In January of 2025, 2/3 of schools in Northern Ireland had engaged with one or more projects in our framework. However, when we look at the post-primary, we can see that only 46% of post-primary schools have any provision. So the proportion goes way down. And when you look at the numbers of schools in terms of those specific programmes, it can get very low indeed. So a quarter of post-primary schools had emotional wellbeing teams, and those teams don't provide individual support now. 1 in 10 schools had a whole school approach programme, that's the Being Well, Doing Well programme, and 31% of primary schools had engaged with RISE. REACH operated in 1 in 10 primary and post-primary schools, and those last two programmes do provide that one-to-one support. Many other schools bring in outside agencies to deliver programmes, and some have dedicated staff or create their own programmes. The data around that and the quality is not currently available, but anecdotally, some of them really are excellent. Having said all of that, Northern Ireland is behind the UK regions in terms of mental health in schools. In England, there's over 600 mental health support teams in schools, and 52% of pupils there are supported, and that's going to rise to 60%. And those teams offer the psychological interventions, the one-to-one support, and they support the schools in terms of positive cultures, staff advice, training, and they also coordinate with external services. So when you compare that to what we're doing here, we really are quite different. The Welsh Government have gone even further, and they've introduced statutory guidance requiring all schools to adopt a whole school approach to mental health and emotional wellbeing. Mental health and wellbeing are now core parts of the curricula, both in England and Wales. So I would add that mental health in schools is a key element of peace building, since poor mental health is related to social violence and prejudice, including racism, which we all know is a massive problem at the minute in Northern Ireland. So I would be asking the department to expand the provision in schools to address this growing need, and even to consider dedicated funding for C&V sector organisations to bring them into the framework. So moving on to neurodiversity. Whilst the committee's focus on SEN is really welcome, I think it's important that the committee review neurodiversity approaches generally in education. So as you're aware, neurodiversity is the range of differences in individual brain processing styles and the normal differences in a population, but it also includes the clusters of those traits, which are the conditions that we know to be autism and ADHD, and there's a range of others as well. So whilst the traits that the people with neurodiversity have are normal, the conditions when the traits cluster together can be disabling, because the structures and attitudes of society create barriers to participation. So the education system is an example of this. So if you have a child with neurodiversity, they can be very easily overwhelmed if the classroom is overstimulating. Some neurodivergent children have difficulty kind of sitting still, and many would have difficulty with the attention and communication style that we might have in a typical classroom. So the cumulative effect of these challenges, and then masking that children engage in to try and get through the day and try and behave as they're expected to behave, that can result in chronic stress and poor mental health, and of course it impairs that child's learning. I have a PhD student, Jamie, at the minute, who is looking at the data in relation to this, and it's quite stark. If you take the 2019 Youth Wellbeing Prevalence Study, people with autism and ADHD are 28% of that sample of 11 to 19-year-olds. And that group has elevated rates of anxiety and depression. Depression there is 17.8% compared with 7.3% in neurotypical groups. Self-harm, 16% compared with 7.2%. Suicidal ideation, nearly a quarter versus 1 in 10. And then disordered eating is really high as well in the neurodivergent group. So what I'm saying is schools need to be neurodiversity-informed environments, and we need to be promoting affirmative practices to improve the experience of these young people. Schools need to be responding to neurodiversity rather than the specialist services. And I realise that there's a resource implication there, but that's kind of the direction we need to be moving here. And we need to be reviewing our education policies through a neurodiversity lens. So the curriculum review is really good in that respect. There's talk about a more inclusive curriculum. And I'm going to work to ensure that that's reflected in the next stages. But you can see there that a recognition of neurodiversity is absent from recent policies on, for example, uniforms and mobile phones in schools. So moving on to ending violence against women and girls. So at today's committee, I wanted to discuss our Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategic framework. The initial actions in this area are very modest, I have to say: campaigns, tech innovations, support in community settings. And they're unlikely to lead to the changes in attitudes and behaviours that we really need. The most crucial actions are those preventative actions, the work to change the harmful attitudes of boys and men and to teach respect and consent. And that has to be done through the education system. And, there's no implementation plan for those actions yet. So I'd like you to look at that and consider it. So moving on, the impact of the recent decisions around transgender pupils. So gender diversity exists, and transgender pupils have a higher risk of poor mental health and suicidal thoughts. There was one study a number of years ago actually that showed that 43.5% of transgender people in Northern Ireland had attempted suicide. The evidence indicates very strongly that gender affirming policies and support and safety in the school setting are protective. A Department of Education survey in 2017 found that 2/3 of LGBT plus pupils didn't feel welcomed or valued at school, and only 55% felt safe at school. The same survey showed that most transgender young people felt that teachers didn't understand them, and 4 in 10 transgender pupils reported inconsiderate use of their forename by staff. Some even reported transphobic remarks by teachers. Almost 3/4 said their experience at school impacted their well-being, and this was in 2017, before the rise in hate crime that we've seen since 2019. So in view of this, the removal of the guidance on supporting trans young people and then the guidance that was circulated to schools is incredibly concerning. The Equality Commission highlighted significant uncertainty regarding the application of the Supreme Court legislation in Northern Ireland, so it wasn't necessary for the department to provide this guidance. And the guidance on pronouns could be interpreted as permitting teachers to engage in behaviour that is experienced as cruel and harmful. This would certainly come under the definition of bullying, which is the repetitive, intentional hurting of one person or group by another person or group where the relationship involves a power imbalance. So bullying is harmful to mental health, and that's why I'm talking about it today. In the study of LGBT pupils in Northern Ireland, some pupils referred to bully-like behaviour by teachers. And in view of these risks, I'm therefore asking that the guidance should be withdrawn and that the previous guidance is put back on the website and circulated again. Anecdotally, though, I have to say many of our schools here provide supportive settings for gender divergent young people and work really hard to make sure that those young people feel safe in schools and that diversity is welcomed. So moving on to school uniforms. The recent legislation was a missed opportunity to tackle poverty, which is a key driver of mental ill health. Uniforms can also create disparity of access, particularly for families facing financial pressures and for disabled or neurodivergent children. So in keeping with trauma-informed practice, these items listed on the uniforms should be co-produced with pupil councils and considering the needs of pupils, the promotion of equity and inclusivity. A trouser option, in my view, should always be available, and no pupil should be forced to wear clothing that leaves them vulnerable to upskirting, for example, or leaves them feeling exposed. Attention should be paid to how uniform items are perceived by neurodivergent pupils and disabled young people as well. And this is really important. Pupils should never be in a position where they feel they can't participate in physical education, which is PE, and that's really important to mental health because they can't wear the uniform. So finally, you'll be glad to know, restraint and seclusion. I want to highlight that I have written to the Minister outlining my significant concerns regarding the Education NI Order 1988, which allows the use of force to maintain good order and discipline in schools. There's no doubt that restraint and seclusion are traumatising and can lead to lifelong mental health difficulties. These practices have no place within our education system. There was a commitment from the Department that Article 4.1c of the Education Order would be repealed and that guidelines would be produced to support schools to eliminate this practice. My office currently sits in the reference group overseeing the production of the guidance. Our group have long had concerns regarding the direction of the discussions within the group and the rejection of the proposals to base the guidance on a modified version of the guidance that's currently used in health settings. Our approach was to actively participate and be solution focused. We've since been informed that the guidance has now been agreed by a task and finish group. That I thought we were on that group. But despite being a member of the reference group, I haven't seen the revised guidance, and my concern is that this task and finish group doesn't have stakeholder representation of the nature that's required, and also concerned, of course, that the guidance produced may not adequately protect children from cruelty, harm and trauma. So in my letter to the Minister, I sought assurances that Article 4.1c will be repealed and asked for an opportunity to review the guidance in collaboration with children's health and welfare experts to ensure that it protects children from trauma. That's me finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll kick off just on the last issue there of restraint. And I mean, you'll be aware of some of the horrific evidence that this committee has heard around restraint and seclusion. And I mean, we heard of a number of cases, a child strapped into a chair, another child actually tethered to a fence, and the parents only found out about that when they saw a photo in the school yearbook where the child was tied to the fence. So how would situations like that affect the mental health of children, especially, you know, some of our most vulnerable children who already have learning difficulties?
This is a trauma. It's a traumatic experience for the child. So there's physical pain at the time and injury often. The child's really scared. It goes into the fight or flight or freeze response. If it happens, often that response is activated. The growing brain means that response can be activated really quickly, and the child can be literally terrorised, going back into that setting again. There can be flashbacks, nightmares. The chronic activation of the stress response system is associated with mental illness, especially in the growing brain, and it's a lifelong thing. So you're talking about triggers almost that are wired in and activated then throughout that child's life. It's really hard to overstate the impact of this on a child's mental health. Yeah. This is really, really harmful. Should never happen.
We've heard arguments that there should always be, you know, a right to restraint under certain circumstances, particularly when there is challenging behaviour. But we have heard evidence also that there are de-escalation measures that can be deployed rather than restraint. Would you be familiar with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's another article in that legislation that permits the use under exceptional circumstances. You know, if the child's going to harm themselves or somebody else, that's permitted. We're talking here about discipline, the use of this for discipline and behaviour management, and it's just never appropriate. It's totally unnecessary. It harms everybody. It harms the children that are seeing this happening as well in the school setting. It's really, it's really inappropriate, and teachers don't want to be doing it. They want that guidance. They don't want to be left with no other way to manage behaviour. So yeah, I'm not familiar with the exact de-escalation techniques, but I would imagine I know a bit about what they would look like.
What sort of response have you had to the Minister in terms of the request that you have made?
It literally only went in yesterday. We're just summing up. We wanted to clarify from the group, the working group, whether there was going to be any more meetings. We haven't had responses. We wanted to give them an opportunity, that group an opportunity to respond properly. So we left it to the last minute really to get this, but we haven't had a response obviously from the Minister yet, but we no doubt will.
Just moving on to the emotional health and wellbeing framework.
Yeah.
I mean, you have been a big advocate for this within schools, and you helped to shape this report. What tangible evidence is there that mental health of children in our schools has improved since this report came out?
Since the framework came out?
Yes.
So we're currently looking at how that's going to be evaluated. So we don't have mental health data like from before and after. But what you will find is if you look at the interventions within this programme, you can see they're all evidence-based. So where they've been used in other settings, there has been that change that we can record. So we don't have the data for the pupils in the school, but you know that if pupils go through the social and emotional learning, for example, elements of being well, doing well, then they will have skills, and then we can go back and show how that will change mental health outcomes and educational attainment as well. Up until the late teens, this makes a real difference. So we don't have that data. It's only been in place for a couple of years. It's only a tiny proportion of young people anyway that have gone through these programs, that you could say, but they do make a difference, and there's strong evidence to support their use.
Okay, thank you. And finally from me for now, one of the areas where many mental health professionals have highlighted where there is stress and anxiety and an area that's detrimental to the mental health of our children is the transfer test. Mm-hmm. Have you had any discussions with the Minister around that?
Well, no, only that the Minister's not minded to change the procedures. And we had that at the last Education Committee that I presented at, or maybe the one before that. But yeah, I mean, I've asked for that. It's an independent review of education. I'm continually calling for that to be looked at and asking for progress on that review, because there's some really, really important suggestions in there that should be brought forward. Because it's not just about removing a test, it's about changing the whole system so that this test, if it's going to be used in some schools, even under the review, would still be using that test, but it's reducing the proportions who would be going through that test and streamlining the system so that it becomes fairer for all the pupils. So I wouldn't be advocating to take one test away and then having nothing in its place. We need to really look at the whole system and how that can be transformed, and the independent review of education is the expert guidance on how that would happen and what that should look like. So that's where we really need to be going with it. But it is sad. Yeah, every year I get queries from parents. How am I going to help my child through this? It's awful, like, for some families.
I'll open it to members. Cathy, you were on first.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Siobhan. There's so much in your report there, and so many different topics that we could cover, but there's two specifically. You mentioned there around school uniforms, and that the legislation that we have is, I think you described it as a missed opportunity, and I would tend to agree with you in that, in what we currently have. But I want to ask you specifically from the point of view of, for talk's sake, we have a teenage girl who wakes up in the morning, discovers she has her period. We all know the symptoms that go along with that. At this minute in time, that girl does not have the right to go into school. The school doesn't say it's okay to go in a pair of trousers, rather than having to wear a skirt, tights, or whatever else it might be. Can you give us any indication as to what impact that might have on that teenage girl?
With teenage girls, you're talking about 53% of teenage girls have mental health difficulties, and anxiety and bodies, everything that goes with menstruation is part of that, and I suppose women will probably know how uncomfortable it can be and how sweaty you get and tights and all the rest. So it's just another barrier to getting them into school and getting them happy and learning. And these things can make a difference in a child just saying to you, I'm not going to go in today. Yeah. Many parents know that feeling when your child's just saying, I really don't want to go. And for teenagers, how they look is just such a huge part of their life. And it's very personal, it's very sensitive. They don't always want to talk to you about it. Mm-hmm. So any choice or flexibility you can give them will get them into school and get on with the business of education, which is really what it has to be about, when I realise that. Mm. So you want to take away those barriers. And I appreciate too that a lot of people won't want to wear trousers, and that's their choice too. But it's just that extra layer of choice. And the upskirting thing is a real problem. We have girls now, like my own daughter included, and all these layers of clothes so that they can wear skirts, the shorts on the top of them and all this. Like it is quite, it would just be great to have more choice, and the pupils themselves want choice, and it's such a simple, easy thing that you can do to make life easier for children. I don't know why you wouldn't. And most schools that I'm aware of actually already do this, but. And I've also seen examples where schools won't allow kids to take off their jumpers when they're too hot, where they have to wear coats rather than raincoats. All of this stuff just makes life more unpleasant, and we wouldn't stand for as adults if we were told we couldn't wear clothes to match the environment or the weather that made us feel comfortable. So It's trauma-informed, you know, and for a child with a sensory issue, and you're a divergent child, autistic person, some of these things are, you know, this can be a real problem and can really impact on their ability to focus and concentrate.
I think everything that you've said there is really important, and they're all things that we as a committee heard time and again from witnesses. And we did bring forward amendments to that. So do you believe they should have been included? And I'm taking from what you've said they should. And have you had an opportunity to engage with the Minister about this since then?
No, I mean, we're talking, these things have come up in the last couple of weeks, you know, so I haven't had a chance to go. And also I need to choose like which are the key issues here that will make a difference. I mean, I thought this was going to be a really positive bill, the uniforms. It was like a no-brainer for me. It was, but I just don't understand it. Yeah, these simple things that they do in other places, I don't get it at all. It just, again, seems cruel, and it's not trauma-informed in any sense.
Okay, thank you. And just leading on from that, something you mentioned there was about barriers in getting children to school, and I've recently been engaging with parents with children who are facing emotional-based non-school attendance, school non-attendance, I think it is now, rather than school avoidance. And I'll be perfectly honest, I probably went in naive to the meeting with those guys, and just the level of despair that there was amongst those parents and children. But I've been doing a bit of back and forth with the department and the EA around this, and one of the letters that the Minister wrote back said that research indicates that educating a pupil outside of their registered school can inadvertently reinforce avoidance behaviours. Now, this was deeply, deeply upsetting for these parents and children when they read that. They felt that it meant that, you know, these are children who have been traumatised following months and years of their needs not being met. Would you agree with that statement, or do you think that there should be exceptional teaching arrangements for these children?
This is really, really difficult. I'm not sure what the evidence the Minister was referring to, but certainly if the child can't come into school and you can't educate the child, what are you supposed to do? The child doesn't get an education. You know, if it's too distressing, and parents know when their child's distressed, so you're not going to put your child in that environment. So you've got to try and do something else. So what's the alternative there? But I do get how, you know, if you sort of normalise this and say this is okay for you. I grapple with this myself as a parent. So if you keep the child off for whatever reason, then they will use maybe that reason on the day that they don't want to go to school or they feel that it's too much. But the answer is always to provide alternatives, to provide choice, to work with the school to get that child in and to make that environment as, you know, not stress free, but to reduce the stress in whatever way you can. And look, I can give you loads of examples of what schools are doing in practice to do this with children. So it's better for that child to be at school, but it's always about you don't want to cause too much distress to that child, because you really are going to have a far bigger problem in your hands than a child that's not going to go to school, and the child's health is going to be impacted in a way that's harder to resolve. So yeah, it's a very delicate, sensitive thing, and each child is unique. And I would even take issue with the idea of emotional based school avoidance. You know, this is about distress here. This is a mental health issue we're talking about. To call it emotional kind of minimises that. And when you talk to parents, you'll realise how significant it is. No parent wants their child to be at home. We prefer children to be in school, and parents want that. So it's about working with that child and creating that environment that's helpful. And I think the neurodiversity affirmative practices in schools would go a long way there. And we see trauma-informed practice in schools, and schools that have there's one of the projects, it's the Trauma-Informed Schools project. You know, we can see there that changes everything. The TAP, I think it is. TAP, TAP, program, yeah. And once schools get that, they start to change things, and the children are coming and everybody's happier, you know. Everybody learns.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, that there are some schools that are doing things brilliantly.
Most maybe, you know.
They just need the guidance, and they just need the support mechanisms there to transport these children the best that they can. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Danny next.
Thank you, Chair. Siobhan, thank you so much. So I want to start off, just you touched on it, and that's our trans young people and the stigmatisation that they are feeling at the minute, and very much has got worse in the last number of years. I think what the Minister done was reckless. I would like to hear your view on it. Is it reckless and dangerous what he has done with the guidance that he has set?
Well, I mean, I have it in my briefing there. I think there's aspects of it that are really, really concerning. So saying that the teachers aren't compelled to use a child's pronouns, that for me, children who are gender divergent say that is traumatic for them, that's distressing for them, and that's that's harmful. I think there should always be that respect for people's identities. And most teachers, of course, as is always the case, they will do that. So that bit is really unnecessary, saying that it's nearly okay to do this. Yeah. I find that really difficult, sorry.
And you hear that rhetoric sometimes within the chamber here, where you have politicians who want to know a definition of a woman, and they say this an awful lot. But see that message they're sending out there from mental health perspective on this. How dangerous is that to our young people with trans who have the highest rate of suicide as well? They have to be very careful with their language.
We're targeting the person's identity. You're saying, you're not what you say you are. You're not. You don't have a right to be you. Yeah. That's how young people perceive that, and that's that's really, really damaging. We don't want you here. You're not you. We're going to call you something that you're not. I don't know if any of us have ever been misgendered, or it really hurts. It's something that's really deeply personal, and we should all be just very, very careful. And we would be, when we're addressing each other, we are very careful. We don't want to cause offence.
Within your role, have you challenged the Minister on this decision? But when you do see, we are leaders when we stand up in that chamber, challenging those who keep doing this because they are putting a massive target on the back of our young people.
Yeah, but it's really worrying. It's embarrassing as well, in a sense, when you see this stuff being played out in the chamber. Yeah. It's the culture wars thing, and you often feel like these are really vulnerable young people who are the collateral damage there. And I just know from speaking to them, we're talking about people who often want to disappear. They would just want to live their lives. They're not putting themselves out there. They're not. It's scary. And they are very vulnerable to suicidal thoughts, and it's a very delicate subject. They're exploring their identity, and they need support so that they can get on with their education. And often they don't want to come to school. If the setting's really unsafe for them, that's what'll happen. It's when you speak to parents, they are at their wits' end.
I suppose you say that the unsafe environment. Is this now that we're seeing a knock-on effect when probably last time we probably didn't touch on racism, but how much that has escalated in the last number of months, and maybe that since last year, we've seen that raise, and the fear of going to school from our newcomer children and families as well. And again, rhetoric that comes from some quarters around, legitimate concerns, and in that sense, where I'm starting to feel that in my constituency, like that fears from people who are living and seeing it online. And then with what Trump has done this week with autism, the way he has stigmatised women and children with autism, does that throw up a concern to yourself as well? All of that's now starting to come together.
Converges. It's a sort of idea of othering. We need a group to target because our society is huge inequalities. And a lot of people are, you can see the deprivation, the differences. Suicide's the one I'm most familiar with, 3 times. The rates of suicide in the most deprived areas, there is that inequality. People are stretched. There's a cost of living crisis. And we're always looking for somebody to blame. And this happens, and then a group is targeted as, this group are responsible. And there's a lot of information, and we're fed this through social media and algorithms. Yeah. And you have then autistic people are targeted. We want to prevent this. We don't want to. We welcome autistic people. They have a lot to contribute. It's just normal. So yeah. This is a problem. It's othering, and when you have a divided society like Northern Ireland, we're very good at that. So it's very worrying.
Looking for the solution to that there, because that's mixed in a whole lot of massive cultural issues there. But when we don't have funding, the Minister made a decision not to fund counselling in primary schools. Like, should that be reviewed? Should we be looking to that support at an earlier age in our schools.
So
Education is going to be key to all of us, but again, it's about it's supporting our young people through the challenges they have.
The best way to approach it is through the social and emotional learning. You know, that is where we talk about relationships and how we connect with other people. And we're doing some work in our generation around social identity complexity, where we realise that we have different identities, and you know, we're part of multiple groups, and those groups will give us protection, and we feel a lot safer in that context. So there's a lot of interventions that really work. It is universal interventions. Now, young people certainly need one-to-one support, and the HOPE counselling services available through the Education Authority. In primary school, one-to-one therapeutic support is usually like play therapy and family therapy, and those they're more the remit of the health service, to be honest, because you're talking about children with mental health difficulties. But then the supports are there in education, but there's maybe not enough of that. But I think the social and emotional learning part of it is the bit that will make the most difference, and resources for schools generally, so that there are enough teachers and that they feel safe, and you know that they're not under pressure in the classroom as well.
Are you seeing an improvement between education and health for them, better outworkings for our young people? Are you seeing an improvement?
Well, the schools that have gone through the Being Well Doing Well programme, I've sat in the ceremonies, the award ceremonies, and talked to the principals. The difference is unbelievable. Like in a school that has that whole school approach, they send out a questionnaire to the parents, and people identify, you know, easy things that can be shifted to make life better.
Is that across the board though?
It's only in the schools where the programme is in, and the schools need to want that and be prepared to make the shift and change their view of education nearly, but the benefits are definitely there.
But I mean, in the general population,
question, Donnie. Thanks.
So,
it will eventually, if enough schools get this, you will be able to track the changes, because the evidence is there from other countries. But we have a lot of other social problems that contribute to mental health too, and schools are not going to be the place where all of that stuff is solved, but it's a really good place that you can start to target some of these key differences and create a more level playing field for the children.
It's a very quick one.
It was just a very quick one that I picked up anecdotally, and it was about mobile phone, the pilot and the pouches, and anxiety for some of our young people, or even who are part of it, are feeling the anxiety around that. Are you picking any of that up?
So the data that was
quick
produced...
answer, please, Siobhan.
Yeah. Most of our young people have mobile phones. The evidence, certainly for 11-year-olds, is that the ones that don't have worse mental health. So having access to the internet every day is a positive thing. It's quite good. Now, if you're on social media too much, your well-being goes down. So there is that correlation between the length of time spent on social media and mental health. But having a phone is neither here nor there, really. They all have phones, you know, whether we like it or not. They all have phones. The ones that have good mental health have phones. They just spend less time on social media. They're doing other stuff, you know, inequality.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Donnie. Michelle, then John, then David.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Siobhan.
Michelle.
I appreciate your time today. Danny, I think, was reading my information because she's asking all my questions, but I'm going to...
Actually, it's really good then, is it?
They're really big. I want to go back to the counselling in the primary schools. I met with a Senko group recently, and they expressed that they were desperate to get that support back into schools. In your role, I think I want to acknowledge, first of all, there is some great work that goes on in schools, and what we were finding was, in the absence of this funded programme from health and from education, schools are paying for this themselves. So great is the need and how impactful those interventions are. So in your role, have you been liaising with the health minister, with the education minister, to try and get this restored? Are you getting any progress on that?
Yeah, so the mental health strategy in health does contain early intervention and prevention actions that could be going to interventions in schools. One of the problems is we actually don't have enough trained specialist young people's counsellors. So when Healthy Happy Minds was delivered in schools, they had difficulty sourcing the counsellors with the right level of qualifications, and they had to widen the criteria there. So, you know, all of these things are relevant to this discussion. But yes, I'm calling for the full implementation of the mental health strategy, particularly the early intervention prevention, which would cover schools, and also for the expansion of the framework. And I think its reach provides, there's a couple of those that provide one-to-one support and group support, because we're talking here mostly about groups of young people who have anxiety. and support for parents who are managing children's anxiety in primary school. So a lot of this can be done in groups, and if you get in at an earlier stage, it's probably better. Education shouldn't need to be paying for all of it. It should be coming through the mental health strategy. I think there is a big focus on counselling, but schools are desperate when they see kids who can't get one-to-one support. Then that's, it's a real problem, and those children are missing years. But the Hope Therapy Counselling Service seems to be going well. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah.
Is there waiting list there?
That's the replacement of the ICSS, getting that acronym right. But
Yeah.
there's for the younger schools particularly. So there at the minute there's a DOH consultation out on the children and young people's mental health and health. It should. Hopefully, if it's realised and how it's been presented, tie into the education as well. So all those parents of younger children, you're considering if there is additional needs, they're maybe going through that assessment process, if it's ASD or if it's ADHD or whatever other sensory issue they may have. If it's additional education needs, then there's that added pressure as well. And counselling can be great in those circumstances to talk families through, but it may not be indicative of a clinical mental illness or a need for support in that way past those kind of difficult periods. What would help is streamlining those additional supports, the assessment criteria that we know families can wait years on, and that time they don't know where they can go for support, and they're turning to their school and saying, what can you do, can you put something in now without a statement or whatever, and all those frustrations kind of build. With the consultation, as I say, it's very new, but the framework that DOH consider will be how all that kind of dovetails, how you can streamline services for young people, really create a wraparound service for all those kind of health needs, that can then obviously link in with every other sector, including CMV and including education, so that you're seeing the young person as their whole person, and education makes up a part of it, and health makes up part of it, and your community makes up part of it, and their family's a big part of it. We have to stop treating them as 5 separate people that they're literally taken from one environment to the other by the person that's their care or their parent. We have to see the services around them in that same capacity, as in how they come together. So education and increased counselling in schools might be one solution to it, but I personally think if you can sort out all those other blockages where they have for that additional specialised support, you'll see the demand drop a bit.
Kind of collaborative working. It's
exactly.
One child, how do we interact?
And needs-led rather than diagnosis.
Yeah.
So this whole idea that you need to have a diagnosis and then you get support, like look at what your child's needs are and their unique needs. And
move on into then like kind of the older children. So then we talked about primary schools. So like when you've talked about that kind of young men and misogyny and toxic influences. How important is just pastoral care in schools in terms of how to interact, positive modelling of behaviour and things in schools to help deal with that issue? I know boys and girls both have a requirement for that kind of pastoral care in different ways, but I think there seems to be a particular issue with young boys at the minute, young men. What is your sense of that?
I think that's it's a really important thing that it's about that whole school approach and the behaviour that we expect of pupils in the school, and how we behave with each other. But it is, I hear stories about young people who don't know about consent. They really don't realise that what they're doing is inappropriate because nobody's ever told them. They've never been taught it. And they get information from pornography about what sexual relationships look like. And that is a real problem. So we do need that education about relationships in our schools as well. So the whole school approach and the school environment and the positive and the care that we have, all of that's really important. And the survey of young people's social media and digital use, it shows that there is information about online safety, and most young people are getting that. So if you were to have the relationships education for all the young people alongside that would be really, really good. Again, a lot of schools are doing it. They realise that this is important and they're already doing it. And I can think of some great examples of boys' schools who do a really good job on this. So
I like that, yeah.
It really depends, but it's not getting to all of our children. And then you have terrible things that happen and you wonder why, how can that be,
I'll squeeze one very quick one in.
Quick one. Yeah.
Again, you referenced the removal of the guidance around transgender kids and your concerns around that, and you spoke publicly about that. Did you get any feedback from the minister to allay your concerns around that?
No, not at all. But many groups, I mean, I'm not the only person that said this. Many groups have expressed concern, including teachers' groups, who've said that they're already doing so much, and that actually if they were to follow these guidelines, it would result in the breach of privacy for young people who've transitioned, who would now have to. I mean, there's all sorts of implications that I think haven't been, that I wouldn't have even have thought through, but people working on the ground to support young people know what this looks like.
Thank you for speaking out on it, because it's a serious issue and it's not an amusing issue, it's not funny. So I'm glad to hear you speak today about it in a way that's serious and takes those kids seriously.
It is really serious though, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. John?
Thanks, Siobhan. I'll just go straight in because time's tight. You said access to mobile phone decreases the risks of mental health.
Well, not quite that, but the children who didn't have access to the internet, and for most children that was through mobile phone, had the poorest mental health in the screens, whatever the survey was that came out more recently. Now that's 11-year-olds. When it goes to 16 though, the less social media is associated with better mental health, for sure. So I'm not saying that this is a good thing, John. Yeah.
Having access to mobile phones in school time, that would logically increase the risk of upskirting in schools.
Well, if that was something that happened, if it was it could.
Upskirting is done with mobile phones, so children having, because you mentioned upskirting as a concern, so having access to your mobile phone increases the risk of upskirting logically.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, by extension, yeah. Now, the trans and LGBT issues, you mentioned some bullying by teachers, allegedly, okay, so it's not been investigated.
I know, and I've been very careful about how I phrase that too, John, yeah.
To make sure teachers are not engaged in that and that the culture's right and pupils can raise issues, school inspection is a vital part of ensuring there's a proper culture, proper safeguarding. Do you think that disrupted school inspections increases the risk of bullying of LGBT and trans people or decreases it?
I don't think I would have. I mean, I don't know if that made any difference, to be honest, because I know schools tend to take bullying very, very seriously, and they have bullying policies.
Except the teachers are involved in it.
Oh, teacher, okay. Well, I would have no data on that, John. Yeah. I don't know.
A professional assessment if a teacher is bullying, or
there's no inspectors in the school.
Inadvertently, if no inspectors in the school, does that increase the risk of bullying culture or decrease it?
But, it could possibly increase it, but I have to say
thanks, that's fine.
Not sure.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise we might as well ban inspections, save a lot of money. Uniform, I'm just interested in the uniform, okay? So I'm only going through quite business-like because
that's fine.
I've got
Don't
time.
worry.
And then use of force. Does the fact that the school uniform per se take a lot of pressure away from pupils in the sense they don't then have to choose different outfits, and there's issues then with money and who can afford what?
No, I believe it does. It can be a leveler, where you've got, and it's certainly easier for parents in the morning, I would say, when there's just a uniform. So no, I totally accept that, although there is an alternative viewpoint that some people have, that it's better to...
Your view as an expert.
Well, my view is it's probably a good thing, yeah.
That's useful. In terms of the upskirting, you said girls should be able to wear trousers, no girls should be exposed to the risk of upskirting. Are you therefore saying that there are uniform in Northern Ireland that is at risk itself is a risk of upskirting, that the uniform creates a risk of upskirting? I'm not sure the link between that and choice.
I honestly, you're saying that so having a skirt at all is a problem?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand.
But
I don't think that. I'm just trying to understand the link between that and a choice of not having to wear a skirt.
No, I mean, and it's not an issue maybe in all schools, but certainly girls do report this as a concern, and they wear items under skirts obviously as well. So that's one thing that they would do just to kind of prevent that. But girls do report this. It is a problem. In our day, it was pulling up skirts.
I think it's
You know,
shocking.
it's always been an issue. The phone kind of isn't the
And let me be clear,
thing that
if-
causes it. It's the misogyny that causes it, if you know what I mean, John.
People
Yeah.
needs dealt with exemplary, actually, because they need to send a message that's total violation. So, seeing use of force, I was slightly confused when you said some use of force is being used and restraint is being used as punishment. That would actually be unlawful, as far as I understand. You cannot use. So, are you saying people are using force as a punishment, as opposed to currently using force to prevent the child injuring themselves or someone else? Because the latter would be.
I'm saying the legislation that's there at the minute permits the use of restraint and seclusion for discipline, which would, for me, so the legislation allows it, and we have highlighted, I don't have a letter here, but we have highlighted the contradictory nature of that.
I'm not talking about seclusion. I'm not
no,
saying you're going to go next
restraint,
door. I'm talking about, you're saying someone can be physically restrained as a form of discipline, not to uphold discipline in the sense of the order of the class to prevent them injuring someone, but you're saying it can be used purely as a punishment according to the current legislation.
So Article 4.1a and 4.1b cover the use of restraint in the case of an emergency. So if a child is at risk to themselves or to another child, or staff member, and again, those emergent cases are protected with 4.1a and b. 4.1c is the use of restraint to maintain good order and discipline. Now, in 2022, the report that the review of this legislation, one of the recommendations was that 4.1c should be repealed because that's open to too much ambiguity, and therefore schools would have a defence if they did. And I know the committee has
Corporal
heard.
punishment's unlawful.
Yes, and that came up, but it reaches the same. So actually, in the letter to the minister that we wrote, they define corporal punishment as a means to use force to maintain order for any other measure than isn't emergent. And don't quote me on the exact wording, but it was very much aligned with what 4.1c was. And again, the guidance, the report that came out in 2022, and the subsequent education minister at the time who said that the recommendation to repeal 4.1c will be upheld. It's just now, obviously, that repeal is up for debate.
I suppose what you're saying is a tidying up exercise. I suppose we're not saying that schools are currently using restraint and use of force as a punishment. That's not happening.
No,
If it was happening, you'd be raising that, because that couldn't sit.
Yeah, and you have heard incidences in this committee where schools have misused it, maybe, and there's been investigations and reviews, as there should.
Yes,
and for the majority of schools and the group that we sat in, we asked the department for examples of why this legislation, why this change couldn't be invoked, because the other members of that group, some quite publicly, withdrew their membership for that reason. They couldn't get the assurance that repeal, as it had been promised, would actually happen. And that's the sticking point. It's not that we believe schools are using this.
Yeah.
We just don't understand why, if a report in 2022 said it's no longer needed, the ambiguity is there.
That clarifies from the thinking. The final one is this: you talk about the teacher should reflect the identity of the pupil. Is there any limit to that? I mean, for example, and just out of point of principle, just for absolute clarity, so could a pupil change their chosen pronouns during the class and say, look, I now wish to change? And you know, is there a limit to this? And does it have to relate to gender, or could it be anything that you perceive yourself as? So in practical terms, what does it mean to the teacher if your position in terms of a child says, I want to identify today as, and I don't want to make this flippant and say animals or anything, I'm just saying, what is the limits to that, to give our teachers some clarity and guidance?
So what usually would happen, no, I mean, I'm taking your question in good faith. What usually would happen is that there's a lot of work goes on between the school and the family, and there's a decision made that at a particular point the pronouns will change. So it's not something that happens during the course of a day, or even, you know, without prior discussion, and it's incredibly delicate and sensitive. Often the peers are very supportive, and the school then would cooperate with what's happening at home, and in collaboration with health services as well.
So, and it's just to finalise then, so...
Go on, John, please.
Yeah. whilst, and many people may have a difference of view on this, but you're certainly not saying that a pupil can at any moment in time simply say, I have to be addressed by this, and their teacher has to follow suit. That there has to be some kind of, even in your view, some kind of governance around that, regulation around that, discussions around that, that it's not just a fleeting thing that can be changing 3 or 4 times in a day. Or
I think we're talking here about just respect between people, using the person's chosen name. I mean, some people do change their forenames for also shorten their names or whatever, and it becomes the name that's used. So it's in that context, John.
I think for clarity for teachers, because these things have to be operationalised at some point, and it's just useful to actually try and understand.
I don't think teachers would. I mean, when this sort of scenario happens, it's really very sensitive and very delicately managed, and it's it's done with the best interests of the child, and it's done out of respect for that child's choices.
Thanks for questions.
Okay, thanks, John. Just come back on the restraint and seclusion stuff, because one of the examples we heard in the committee was a young boy with autism who was in a mainstream class, and he was stimming, this rapid hand movement that autistic kids use when they're feeling anxiety or stress, and his hands were strapped to the chair with the straps of his school bag on the basis of good order and discipline, that he was distracting other pupils in the class. Now, that was the reason that was given for restraining him, but to the child and to the parents, it sounded very much like punishment. And would you like to comment on that?
It's sometimes very difficult to know why things happen, whether they're punishment or to maintain discipline in the class or whatever. I think we need legal clarity that some things are just unacceptable, and that difficult, challenging behaviour generally needs to be managed in a particular way, and there's lots of evidence about the best way to do that. And that's the kind of spirit that we're working with this group to achieve guidance that is helpful for teachers. And teachers can get very stressed in those situations as well, and they have very few tools open to them. So, this is a very difficult thing to manage whenever a child's behaviour is distracting. But that's a coping strategy for that child, and that child has a right to have their education in that class as well. So, this just needs to be acknowledged, and the legal framework needs to be clear, so that there's no doubt about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
And of course, better training for teachers as well.
Well, yeah, and that neurodiversity lens, just an understanding of what stimming is, would have changed everything there, no doubt,
Thanks very much, Chair. Just to start off with, and I don't plan to take a lot of time questioning around this, because I think we could go round in circles on the basis of just having different views on anybody, and I think that's one thing I want to acknowledge. But we've had talk of how the culture wars. We've had talk of culture wars. We've had talk of how it's been addressed in the chamber. Michelle, with due respect, just looking at me when she was saying that these aren't humorous issues. I don't think many people think these are humorous issues. There's a divergence of opinion on these issues, and it's not in this room or the chamber. It's across the globe. We have seen societies divided on these issues, and I think there are certainly, no doubt, parents of pupils who have who have challenges around gender that are concerned. I don't doubt that for a second. But I have to say, from our party's perspective, we also understand that there are a lot of parents out there of children who are going to school, and they have concerns around what they may be learning in school, around how safe single-sex spaces within schools are, around, whilst this is very, very rare and not overblowing it, in terms of sports teams and them playing competitive sports, whether that's against the same sex. All of these things have been swirling around and are a big debate in society. So I don't think we should minimise it to the idea that some people just stand up on their soapbox and are trying to blow it up. This is an issue that is being debated across the Western world, and I think that's just and we have different views on it, and I think there has to be a realisation of that. Schools in the past, I would hope you would accept, they haven't always been particularly welcoming places to be if you're from a faith background, if you are conservative of view. I've spoken to both families and teachers who find staff rooms at times and other places, are largely more liberal than they necessarily be. That's okay. That's fine. But I think sometimes it is difficult to be in these places as a Conservative, but it's not wrong to be able to stand over and recognise that there are different views out there. To move on to other issues, you can comment on that if you wish, but I don't think there's an awful lot of sense in continuing down that road. We've had our RSE inquiry and so on.
I would say
Okay.
if a child feels that they're being bullied because of their faith in school, that's a really important issue that I need to be
Nothing's
aware
wrong.
of, and we need to be asking that question if that, if that's, and I'm really sad to hear that. Most of our schools do have an element of religion in there, and so. A lot of our schools are faith schools, essentially. So it is really worrying.
Essentially,
actually.
but
Yeah.
it's very soft in terms of the ethos, and quite often that's not necessarily reflected in classes. Certainly, even in my generation, that wasn't reflected in our classes hugely. So I guess it's different experiences from different people.
I wouldn't want any child to
No.
feel unsafe or bullied.
Can I just say, bullying is wrong.
Yeah.
Whatever is the purpose behind, or the reasoning behind it. That's absolutely
But
accepted.
I think it's this inadvertent thing, of. So bullying is wrong, but it's how we define that, what that looks like, and how we make people feel safe and valued in a school setting.
Yeah.
So previously we talked about debates that might happen in schools around transgender issues, LGBT issues, that leave children feeling very vulnerable and marginalised and question their right to exist nearly, and that's where I think
we can't
need to be looking at this.
either impose gender ideology upon children as if that is the only. You have to accept that this is just the way it is. There's many of us hold to the idea, and I don't want to go down this route, but there's many of us hold to the idea that there is two sexes, and that is it. There is not a spectrum of genders, and that is not something that is something that I hold to, and I understand that other people here don't. I don't think it's necessarily helpful to continue down the line, but I think we both express our views
but
in this.
all I would say, just to close it off, is that there are gender divergent young people in our schools, and that is a reality. I don't think we
I understand some of the issues around that. I don't necessarily think I would define it always in the same way. That's fine. There's some questions I do want to ask in terms of this. You talked about neurodiversity, neurodiversity and the more inclusive curriculum. And this is a genuine question. It's something there seems to be, because it seems to me there's different views in this even within the SEN families, SEN communities around this idea of, we talk about SPIMS, but SEN within mainstream, and what does adapting a mainstream education for neurodiversity look like in practice? Because I've certainly talked to some families who don't believe that their child and maybe that's where they are in the spectrum could ever be would he ever be able to deal with that kind of education. So I'm interested to know what kind of changes you think would make that possible.
Yeah, and I'm agreeing with you on that, absolutely, because for some children their needs are such that there needs to be an alternative setting. But I think for a lot of, we're talking maybe 28%, if you think about ADHD and autistic
of course,
children.
the more moderate,
so
more
we just
around
need more consideration. And some of the examples I've been using are the sensory environment in a classroom, the need that some children have to STEM in order to feel safe and to regulate their emotional responses. A lot of schools now have nurture rooms and sensory rooms that children can use. And this is all good practice, allowing for fidget toys, allowing for transitionary objects that children will have that help them feel safe, allowing all of that within schools and prioritising relationships in schools as well, so the teachers are better tuned into the needs of children and really listen to that. And some children, they won't do well in a classroom environment and they'll need a bit of extra support, and that's the kind of thing we're talking about. But it's unique. It's about that understanding of what dysregulation looks like for an autistic child or for somebody with ADHD, knowing both of them co-occur actually frequently as well, and just being really sensitive to the needs of the child that you have in front of you.
So it is really about that more modern end of there's an acceptance that there will be people who have different
I think we have to kind of, and that's the way we're moving, but I'm not a neurodiversity expert. And
it's just sometimes when I hear that, and I'm not saying, sometimes when I hear it I feel that there's almost we can change the world to fit everybody and that will make everything okay, and I just and I might be picking that up wrong, but that's the reassurance I was seeking on that, I guess.
Oh no, I totally get it. We can't meet
could I just ask, because I know I'm probably running out of time.
We're running over time.
Could I just ask, you said you were concerned about the inclusion of employability within the framework. Could you expand on that? What exactly is the concerns that you have around that?
So no, the employability bit's really, really good. It's all about skills and digital and everything, but it's having it alongside mental health or well-being and employability as it is. What I would be saying is that employability is separate, and I think that's what the education department are kind of recognising as well. If you look at the curriculum in other areas or in other regions, even in other countries, they have well-being here and employability. And you know, if it's done properly, the two could be together in the same subject, if you like, but it is very different. You know, you're teaching children about their emotions and emotional regulation and how to look after themselves and how to manage their relationships, you know, and employability builds on that as well, but there's specific skills that wouldn't be in the well-being. So it's a bit of an odd kind of
it's the nuances of it. Yeah. No, I understand
that's all. There's no real concerns about that. I mean, I really like what's happening under Transform Ed and the curriculum reviews.
You said in your presentation you had some concerns around that, but I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Putting them both together, I was like, how employability and well-being, but is one going to be diluted? Does one come secondary to the other? It's all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
But you know, we're being involved in the next stage, so I'm hoping that will be all right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that, Siobhan, and Nicole as well. That's been very useful and informative today. So I wonder if you would keep the committee abreast of your communications with the Minister and whether there has been any progress in any of the requests you've made to him.
Yeah, thank you. And equally, I mean, if the committee were interested in addressing any of the issues that I raised, I'm really happy to engage further and, you know, to bring on other experts or whatever so that we could maybe tackle some of these issues going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
For that.
Thanks.
Okay, I just ask the clerk to summarise any actions or requests for additional information coming out of that session.
So everyone, I think the first action might be to ask for a Hansard transcript of that, because it was very dense material and it actually referred to the inquiry terms of reference as well. So just might want to have that available to members for reference. And it would be useful as well to maybe share that transcript when we receive it with the department. To highlight the headline points made by the mental health champion and the good practice that she pointed to in schools, in particular approaches in schools. Also, it may be timely to request an update from the Task and Finish group in regard to restraint and seclusion. I think they came in last on the 8th of April. Mm-hmm. And that's all that I had. If anyone else has anything I can add.
Was there anything else any member wants to add? Have we agreed then with the clerk's summary? Okay, we'll move on. We're slightly behind time, colleagues. I think I've been too generous in allowing questions to be asked, so I'll have to get the whip out for this second session. But we're going to move to matters arising now, and the first item is correspondence from Michelle in relation to the Minister's visit to Florida.
I raised this last week. The chair had asked me to write in to confirm the contact that it had, and it really was just there was concerns raised about that in the context of value for money. It's a very tight budgetary position at the moment. The issue with SEN is particularly painful, and just there was a request to get a bit more detail and just demonstrating the value for money of that trip.
Any other members wish to?
No,
okay. Okay, we'll move on. In relation to the meeting.
Sorry,
David.
I was only going to. I have no problem, seeking information on that. The only thing I would say is that there are, and I mean, I haven't talked to the Minister around this trip, so happy enough to get the information. But I think this committee will look at some stage, or is talking about looking at a trip where, if it's useful in terms of learning and best practice internationally. Other committees doing it. I've travelled to Brussels as part of the DSC committee for some of those things. I think we should be clear that it is not outlandish or unusual for ministers, committees or others to look at international efforts where they can learn from them, where there's benefit to be taken. So I don't know, you're asking for information around that, but
Just to be clear, I'm not questioning the value
Yes.
of trips that have informative. There is a specific concern about the value for money of
Yes,
those
no. Just in terms of contrasting it with some of the big crises, whether that's in education or whether it's elsewhere, I just think, I just think it's worth outlining that such trips are not unusual across the board for other, and there can be good reason for them. We can get the information, we can discuss them, but I just think it's
Just
worth
reflecting
a general
what was
point. Yep, no.
Fair enough. In relation to the meeting yesterday, so we convened a meeting yesterday to consider retabling of committee amendments to the School Uniforms Bill, and there's no impediment to submitting amendments which were not listed on the last marshalled list for debate at consideration stage. And advice is clearly indicated that any individual member can submit them independently of a collective committee view. So there were not enough members at yesterday's meeting to be quorate and thus reach a collective decision on the handling of the amendments. But those present were keen, given that these were committee amendments, to take the view of others who couldn't attend. And as a result, we asked the clerk to seek the views of those not present on the basis that there was a deadline for submitting amendments that expired before we could meet this afternoon. Given that the amendments are listed in the committee report and tabled for the last debate, there was scope to complete an administrative task against significant time pressures if all were in assent. Ensuring consensus and that all are content with the procedural handling of committee business is important to ensuring we work together in a constructive and collegiate manner. However, we did not have consensus to do this, and so the committee process ended at that point, and the amendments were not tabled for further consideration stage in the name of the committee. I'd refer members to minutes of yesterday's meeting. There's correspondence from David on the retabling of committee amendments and for further consideration stage in the tabled papers. So I'll open it for any, Cathy and then Danny.
Yeah, Chair, just to be honest, I just want to express my frustration over this. We have, as a committee, spent so much time and so much effort on the School Uniform Bill, and there was committee members that weren't here yesterday. We had made the effort to come down, discuss this and find a way forward. We then made another effort to try and do it in writing. It was purely procedural. The amendments that we brought forward as a committee, there weren't things that we just dreamed up. We sat here for weeks and weeks and listened to this evidence coming through. These are not things that we just picked out. They're coming from what we heard. People, children, suppliers, parents give up their time to come in here and give us their views. We were simply doing what our job is to do, and is try and make this bill the best it possibly can be. And it's so frustrating. This is not something that should be party political. This is not something the cost of school uniforms impacts everybody. It doesn't just constituents of mine. It's everybody's, and it's just so frustrating that this is where we're at now with this. We had these amendments as a committee, and we should have been able to move forward as a committee with these amendments again. That's just my view on it.
Hey, Danny.
Yeah, no, sure, a lot of what Cathy's just said there, and we just heard from the mental health champion saying that this should have been a positive bill, and unfortunately it hasn't been. We listened to a lot of evidence. That's where our amendments came from. They were within the scope of the bill. We worked alongside the Bill's office. A lot of hard work went into it. I'm glad they're now being resubmitted. Now, would have preferred the way Cathy laid it out there, the way it should have been through the committee, but look, they're tabled now, and I suppose it gives a second chance to the House, and hopefully they will be debated next week, because they should be debated, because they are within the scope of the bill and the great work that was done within this committee, and our job is scrutinising a bill and to make a bill better. So I'm really hoping now that once they go in, they can, on reflection, that the Speaker would see that the work that was done, and then we can have a proper debate on Monday and make this a proper bill.
David?
Chair, there's two following on from what's been said, there's two issues here. One is the content of amendments themselves. That's one thing to be debated. Cathy had said, that this is about the cost of school uniforms. I don't differ from that at all. I think it absolutely is about the cost of school uniforms. I think there's other aspects of the amendments that we will have disagreements on, and that's that. But in terms of the cost of school uniforms, I don't think there's anybody on this committee or in the chamber even has any difference to be had in terms of trying to reduce the cost of school uniforms. Secondary, in terms of the point that I've raised, which is outlined in the letter, it's a procedural point, and it was made to the Bill's office, and really, and in fact, I've given the reference there. I sit on the Peter used to be here, but I sit on the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee. That committee, for exceptional circumstances, has asked to have substitute membership and also asked for proxy voting. Legal advice was received in regard to that said that proxy voting could not be allowed. The point that I raised with the Bill's office was that where a formal committee meeting has not been court and been able to therefore make a formal decision, if you then have a situation where people can, in effect, vote through by return via email, and I understand this was being argued to be an administrative issue. If we set the bar for administrative issues at amendments being laid for primary legislation, that is a very high bar, and it's hard to imagine many things that would not then fall under the jurisdiction of what is administrative issue. And my argument was that sets a very dangerous precedent, not just for this committee but across the board, because the next time that there's a vote on something where there might be disagreement, what's to stop any member emailing a clerk and saying, I want my vote to be cast via email, and there's precedent for this at the Education Committee. So that was the issue that I raised. It was considered, and we are where we are now. So I think these are two separate issues. I made it very clear that the issue I raised was procedural. The amendments. The Speaker will decide on the amendments. Did so before. That will not be. I'll not have influence on that. But I think unless it's a procedural issue, and I think that's been argued.
Michelle?
Yeah, no. Over it all, but I guess the opportunity for us all to have our views heard on this was yesterday during the meeting, so it was disappointing that we didn't have a quorum to be able to do that properly. We could have reached a decision at that point, and I know efforts were made to ensure that we would have quorum before, and then it was disappointing that didn't happen. We did what we did, understanding that there may be an objection, and I think the fact is your objection was upheld, so we don't have that precedent now. I don't think anybody's really querying that, so we've taken it forward the way we've taken it forward. It'll be the Speaker's decision. I think most of the amendments that we discussed as a committee were agreed by the committee. I think maybe there's only 2 that weren't agreed by everybody within the committee. So, Speaker will make his decision. He's made his decision already. But I think, just to reiterate, we had an opportunity yesterday to have this discussion and people to put on record whether they either wanted to agree or disagree. And we didn't take that yesterday, so we are where we are. And we'll just move on from there.
I just would say when meetings are arranged at short notice, during sitting days when other people have other commitments or other things that they've been to, it can be difficult to get to. So
the spirit the whole way through this has been we were instructed to work hard, and we have done that.
And I have to say, I made clear I understood completely that those amendments could be laid. This was not. I was not. There was no power to stop amendments being laid. This was about the procedure of this committee.
Just because I was in the chair yesterday, Nick couldn't be here for a very good personal reason. The advice we took, not just from the clerk of the committee, but also senior official from the business office, was that it was possible to table the amendments and then discuss it at today's committee meeting, and if we couldn't get agreement around it, that there was a simple procedure of not moving the amendments when it came to the debate. So there was no intention, there was nothing underhand. Everything was above board. We followed the advice of the officials. When you lodged an objection, then the officials then said, because there wasn't consensus, the tabling of the amendments couldn't go forward as committee amendments, but they could go forward either as party amendments or as individuals, and that's what has happened. So, it's no big deal, but just for clarity around it all. We'll leave that there then. There's no other issues on that. Okay, so we've just received correspondence from the department setting out technical amendments tabled by the Minister for further consideration stage, and they're offering to have officials attend remotely to answer questions about them. Now, I haven't seen those amendments. I don't know whether anyone else has. And my view would be, I mean, this process has already proceeded, in my view, with undue haste. If we are going to carry out our scrutiny role properly and efficiently, this lastminute.com doesn't help us in any way. So we're going to get a Zoom meeting with officials who are going to go through amendments that we haven't seen. So I'm throwing it out there, Danny, and to take views on what we should do in this.
They were circulated in table papers, as was the conversation that I had with David yesterday, just for everybody's information. But I think the letter came at 1:05 from the Minister offering officials.
Yeah, and I was going to make that point, and I think it's come too late. Just in the whole procedure that we have had through the Uniform Bill, you know, it only came to light last week when the Minister replied, I think, to yourself around the guidelines that, you know, you should never expect to see the guidelines until this is all the way through, when we've been told very specifically that we would have had them, and not to rehearse all of that again. But again, this is sort of like, for me, making sure the same thinking process, maybe I think it's a wee bit of contempt, a wee bit of misleading, and I don't want to be any part of that, and I would like more time on it, so I wouldn't be wanting to propose that we don't take them today.
Anyone else?
I mean, I would sense if they're willing to come and give us information, I'd be willing to hear it. So just that in terms of my position, that's my own.
Okay.
Get that information, I'm happy to hear it. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean,
So just let me
Go ahead.
lay this out. First of all, as I said, this process has been rushed, and I'm going to hold my own hands up again. I've already done it in the chamber, that we as a party acquiesced to the Minister's request for a condensed committee stage. That was a mistake on our part, and it won't happen again, whatever legislation he brings forward to this committee. Secondly, we were misled by officials. We were told that guidelines were imminent. They weren't imminent. They didn't appear, and the Minister stated in the chamber last week that they were never going to appear. So that's an issue that needs clarified, and you know, parties can seek clarification on that, and I hope the committee would also want to seek clarification on it. Thirdly, the Minister called the chair of the committee in the day about an hour before further consideration stage, and asked him not to move the committee amendments that had been accepted by the Speaker. Of course, the chair of the committee was never in a position to give that commitment. But it's indicative of the way the Minister has tried to bring this piece of legislation forward. It's lastminute.com, it's you know, on a wing and a prayer thing. So my own view is that we don't hear from officials today. If anyone has any objections to that, I'm happy to hear it.
could I just say, Chair, that officials do engage with the process. You know, everyone is a public servant who comes to the committee, and they do engage, and things sometimes change that they don't have power over. So just to balance that.
Look, I understand the view that has been put forward by Pat. I would just say that whatever different views around the table around what has gone before, I think it's not. It doesn't help anybody to basically say we're not happy with what has went before, therefore we're not going to take any further opportunities to hear any more, to ask questions, to make the points that you've made to the officials. So that, I mean, my view is that I believe that we should hear from the officials. I don't expect that to be shared, but that's my own view.
It's not that we don't want to hear from them. It's the fact that it was sent again late today, and we haven't got a chance to scrutinise it. So, again, I don't think it's appropriate that we should just let it come in on a last minute .com.
John, you wanted to come?
Yeah, I just said
through the chair, please, everybody.
Chair, I mean, the meeting the other day or yesterday was fairly last minute as well. So, look, I would just say on the record, while sometimes we disagree on a lot of stuff, I will support everything about this committee having the full power of scrutiny because it's vital. But I am of the view that we should hear from them if it's available. But we can reiterate our views about the last minute nature of it, right to the minister or whatever. But I think we're cutting our nose to spite our face by not actually just hearing people who are ready to give us an input.
At the end, Michelle. Sorry.
I take the points, but the meeting that was arranged for yesterday wasn't at an hour's notice. We're expected here to do our job as scrutinising what amendments are coming forward as a committee. I still haven't seen them, so I do not feel comfortable in being able to question the department officials when I don't even know what I'm questioning them on.
Yeah.
I was going to say is I have no problem listening to what they want to tell us. I don't know what the process is from here, though. If we're decision making, I'd have a little concern over making decisions, having not had the chance to read it. But I've no issue hearing what they have to say to give us advice and guidance to consider. But I don't know where we go from here in terms of what this discussion, the implications of it are.
That's fair, Chair. My view just did.
So what happens now? Like we discuss this, and they give us advice. What are we actually? Are we making decisions that have an implication, or is it just for our information, or what?
This will be in the chamber, of the
the advice would just inform debate in the chamber at further consideration stage. And in the meantime, you do have to consider that you've got officials outside waiting, for quite long in the toothbrush schedule briefing. So it's a matter for members. It's possible to get a written briefing or to ask officials to come in when this other session is over or not. To have.
Are they able to give us a written briefing on it that we can take away ourselves?
Yeah, I'll check if that's a possibility. Yeah. Would that be a compromise for everyone?
Yeah, because I'm happy to. I think we want the information, like however we get it. Yeah.
We're happy with the written briefing on that.
Yeah. Again, I think we should hear from them, but I'm not, sensing the room, that's fine. But just to put my view on record, I think hearing from them allows the opportunity for questions on anything that they do say. But I accept the view of the room.
Okay, are we agreed then, other than David's dissension, to ask for a written briefing as opposed to a Zoom meeting here today? Yes?
Agreed.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on to...
Sorry, are we still under Matters Rising?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm not sure whether this is the right place for it or not, but I just wanted to raise around the Minister making the announcement around the bursaries. I don't know about anybody else, but I seen it in the media just yesterday. I'm not sure procedurally what way, if there's a ministerial announcement like that, should we not be hearing of that in the chamber or through the committee rather than in the media?
Yeah, well, I have heard the Speaker himself on a number of occasions chastising ministers for making statements outside of the Assembly chamber. It's bad practice, but ministers don't seem to be listening to the Speaker. And I mean that was a statement that the minister should have made in the chamber. I'd love to hear from the minister as to why, or any minister as to why they make statements outside the chamber. The media are informed before members of the Assembly. And to me, that's just bad practice.
Chair, with members of the party, usually ready to hit it out in social media, and I mean that against all, not...
all ministers in all parties.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. If this needs enforced, it needs enforced by the Speaker across the board, and actually there needs to be a consequence, because it's getting party advantage out of with their ministerial role. It's not acceptable.
Could I propose maybe that we write to the Minister, maybe seeking clarity on that, why we didn't get a statement, and then asking for more clarity or more information on the actual bursaries. I had questions, I don't know about anybody else, about teachers who are already in trainee teachers. Are they going to be able to get these bursaries, or have they missed the boat on it, and just things like that? So if we just get more information on it.
Is there agreement from members on that?
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay.
Imagine you probably have an announcement in the chamber before you get a response, but yeah.
Item 5, draft minutes. Refer members to draft minutes of the Education Committee meeting of the 17th of September 2025, page 9. Our members agreed that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Agreed? Okay. Okay, move on to our next presentation, which is an update on the recommendations of the PAC report on special educational needs. This is an oral briefing by the officials. Refer members to a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 59, DE briefing paper at page 60, Research and Information Service research paper on progress against the 2021 PAC report on science at page 66, and the PAC report itself on impact review on special educational needs at page 87. And I'd like to welcome to the committee Ronnie Armour, Janis Scallon and Deirdre Ward. Thank you for coming. You have 10 minutes for a presentation, Ronnie, up to 10 minutes, and then members will ask questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. I want to start by thanking the committee for the opportunity to update you on the work of the department in progressing the 7 recommendations made in the Public Accounts Committee report of 2021. Before doing so, I do want to welcome the review the committee is undertaking in relation to SEN, and to assure you that the department stands ready to support you in any way that we can. And I know a number of my colleagues will be coming in subsequent weeks to give you detailed briefings in different aspects. Turning to the PAC recommendations, my intention today, Chair, is simply to provide a broad overview of the progress to date and to seek to answer any questions the committee may have. Briefly, recommendation 1, which focused on the need for an independent review of EA, was addressed through the landscape review, which reported in 2022-23. Recommendation 2, which focused on the need for an external review of SEN services, is perhaps the most significant in the context of the committee's work. I would suggest that the delivery of this recommendation remains ongoing. The Ipsos review of 2023 was the department's response to the recommendation, and flowing from it was the jointly led end-to-end review of SEN. This concluded at the end of 2024 and led to the publication of the Minister's SEN reform agenda and 5-year delivery plan, which was published in February. Since then, most of the enabling actions outlined in the reform agenda have been delivered, including the SEN policy statement, an outcomes framework, the establishment of a delivery unit, and agreement on the governance structures to oversee delivery. These developments over the last 6 months chart, I would suggest, a clear strategic direction taken by the Minister as key priorities and the early actions we're taking. We're happy to explore these areas with the committee today and during subsequent weeks. Recommendation 3 focuses on the need for a rigorous performance monitoring. This recommendation has been implemented with performance data collated by EA and considered carefully by both DE and the EA board. Recommendation 4 focuses on the important area of oversight by the EA board. In addressing the implementation of this recommendation, the EA board is perhaps best placed to comment on whether it's satisfied with the oversight it now has, but I certainly have no reasons to believe that the board is not. Recommendation 5 deals with the absence of reliable information and data in the EA. This recommendation is on track for achievement. As part of the move to the new local impact teams model, there is now one single management information system spanning all pupil support services. The data available from the new reporting mechanism in relation to local impact teams will feed into the EA's corporate performance framework. Digitisation of the statutory assessment process will also improve data quality and availability. Recommendation 6 called for a review of the effectiveness of the funding allocated to all stages of the SEND process. The Ipsos review considered this issue and reported that the SEND system needed to be realigned and reformed to move from a process-driven system to a child-centred approach which meets the needs of children with SEN, improving their educational outcomes. And while that funding is being used and effectively and demonstrates value for money. The result in the first recommendation was for DE to develop an action plan for transformational change, which we have now done. Recommendation 7 focused on EA's decision making and appeals. While I suspect the committee will want to explore this issue further with EA, they have strengthened their decision making process and are now reporting to DE and the EA board on tribunals' appeals data, amongst other things. Chair, I want to assure the committee that progress in relation to the delivery of the recommendations is monitored by the Department of Education's internal audit team and reported quarterly to the Audit and Risk Committee. Given the progress to date, I hope you can see the clear commitment from both the Department and EA to delivering meaningful change across the education system and improving outcomes for our children and young people with SEN. That said, I do want to acknowledge the ongoing frustrations across the system, not least in the context of delays in securing school placements. The scale of the challenge, Chair, before us is significant and requires substantial investment and collaboration to ensure the needs are addressed and our staff are supported. This has been reflected by the Minister in his recent statement to the Assembly. The SEN reform agenda signals the Minister's commitment to ensuring that all our children with SEN receive the right support at the right time by the right people in the right place. We all have an important role to play in delivering the programme for government priority, that we better support children and young people with special educational needs. For our part, we do not underestimate the scale of the challenge that is before us, but neither do we underestimate the scale of the opportunity before us should we secure the necessary resources. Consequently, I look forward to working with you as a committee as you undertake this review. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. And I'll kick off. So we had successive Audit Office reports 2017, 2021, and then this PAC report. And we're being told that there were eye-watering sums of money, hundreds of millions of pounds, being spent on provision for SEN children. And yet neither the department nor the EA were able to show value for money. Can you tell me or tell the committee what has changed in the intervening period?
Well, I think, Chair, a significant amount has changed in the intervening period. I mean, I think we are still spending very significant amounts of money, as the committee will know, in terms of our SEN budget. We're working very closely with EA. The end-to-end review looked at every step through the process, and culminating from that is our delivery plan and action plan. So we're working closely with EA to ensure that we are delivering value for money, but we're working in a very challenging environment, as the committee will know.
But I suppose, Ronnie, can you show evidence that the public are getting value for money, for the money that's being spent on SEN? Because you know, neither your department nor the EA were able to do that previously, and that's why I'm asking you if anything has changed.
Well, I think things have changed, as I say. I mean, I think we are working much closer together. I think, you know, we can demonstrate.
Give me an example of an area where things have changed.
Well, I think things have changed in relation to how closely we're working together around the placements, which is one of our major challenges.
But that's been another debacle this year.
Well, I wouldn't accept that it's been another debacle. I would say that it's been extremely challenging.
What was different between this year and last year?
Well, I think when you look at the numbers of children, I think when you look at the way we were able to place all of the children by the beginning of September. I think that is a significant step forward, and I think we have to look at this in the context of the numbers that we're dealing with here. I mean, over 1,300 places had to be found. And I do pay tribute to the work of the EA and colleagues who work tirelessly to achieve that. I'm not here to say that it's perfect. We have a long way to go, but I do think there is evidence of very close working and examples of how we're trying to address what is a very challenging situation.
One area where there is massive amounts of money being spent is on transport. What improvements have there been in regard to transport in terms of demonstrating value for money?
Well, I think transport is one of those challenging areas. We have to provide the transport that's required. That is very challenging to do that. I think we can all look at individual cases and say, look, that could be done differently, or that could be done better. But I think overall, in terms of transport, the sooner we can get, for example, children placed, the quicker we can address some of the transport issues.
Okay, let me just give you one example of this, Ronnie. And it's not by any means an isolated example. I'm talking to a principal in a primary school in West Belfast who has a number of specialist provision classes in his school. There's a child being taxied every day back and forth from Downpatrick. Now, just for the week, I'm sure that's costing close to £1,000. How is that value for money?
Well, I think that's unacceptable that a child is having to
But it's happening all over the place.
Well, I accept that, and that is part of the difficulty, I think, that EA face in terms of the scale of the problem they're trying to address. But I'm not going to sit before the committee and try and argue that that particular case demonstrates value for money. I think it is unacceptable that a child is having to travel that far. But that, unfortunately, I would assume is the necessity of the individual situation and circumstances that has been required, but I can't comment on the...
Ronnie, if this was an isolated case, I'd say, look, there must be a problem, it'll eventually get sorted out, but it's not isolated. No. Because all of us as MLAs are hearing from right across the north of similar situations. So I'll ask you again, in terms of transport, tell me that you can show, that you can demonstrate that there's value for money in the vast amounts of money that are being spent on transport.
Well, I think we can demonstrate that we are delivering value for money in the best way we possibly can. But I can't go into to say that in every case we're delivering value for money.
Okay. So the PAC found that the EA didn't even know how many children needed SEND support. Do we know now?
Sorry, go ahead, Janis.
In terms of the number of children that require support at each stage of the code of practice?
Well, whenever.
Yes.
I mean, children who need support in the education system, do we know how many?
You know, there are just under 70,000 children, yes, who are on the same
who need support.
Yes.
So, and I asked you this question before, Janis. So many of those children need wraparound support from speech and language therapists, behavioural therapists, occupational therapists, social workers, and so on and so on. So, how many allied health professionals do we need to provide support for those children, and can you break down into each discipline what we actually need?
In terms of the workforce, Chair, we've been here before, and you heard from the Chief Allied Health Professions Officer. In terms of the provision for children, it would be remiss of me to speak on behalf of another department, and the prime responsibility for the provision of health services as per the Code of Practice for special educational needs is the prime responsibility of health authorities. But we do know how many children in our schools have presenting with speech, language and communication needs. We know how many are presenting with delayed language
disorder. We know how many are presenting with medical needs. So we have that breakdown, but in terms of what those children actually need,
right.
not all children with speech language communication need speech therapy.
So if you know how many need speech and language therapy, if you know how many children need that support, then you must know how many speech and language therapists you need to provide that support. Is that not common sense? Or am I living in a parallel universe?
We know the needs that children are presenting with. We record them on the school systems on the SEN register. They're recorded either under special educational needs or medical needs. Some children will appear in both registers. But as for the actual provision for each individual child, it will be different depending on whether that child may be recorded with speech, language and communication needs. But it will be a professional therapist who will have to decide what the nature of the intervention is for that child. There are some things that teachers can do in the classroom. There are some things that classroom assistants can support teachers in the classroom with. For some children it might be small group teaching, it might be small group therapy, or it might be individual therapy. Could be community speech therapy, could be child development clinic therapy. It actually might need therapy and intervention from the autism intervention service. We know what the needs are among the children, but in terms of the provision for that child, it's not for an educationalist to decide what health provision is required. For the children who have statements, for the almost 30,000 children who have statements, that will be outlined in their statement of special educational needs, either under education provision or under non-education provision.
So for the children who are statemented, we do know how many allied health professionals are needed.
Well, we know what's stated in their statement, and that data will be held by the Education
Authority. I'm not
Authority.
asking what's in their statement. I'm asking, do we know how many allied health professionals are needed to provide that support?
We wouldn't hold that data.
We don't have that.
Okay, well,
we don't have that.
Okay, Janis, you've mentioned the fact that this is an area for health. So, Ronnie, how many meetings have you had with your counterpart in the health department around this issue, and what's been on the agenda in those meetings?
I've had two discussions with the new Permanent Secretary of Health since his arrival. We met early on because I was keen that he would have an understanding of the issue that we're dealing with here, and we've had a second discussion around establishing a joint group between health and education to try and drive forward the change. They are facing massive resource issues, as are we. One of the things I think that we perhaps needed to do better and are trying now to do is to be very clear with health in terms of what our ask is. So I will shortly be submitting a paper to my opposite number for further discussion around the needs that we have and what our ask is.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll open it up. Michelle, you're in first.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the evidence today. I think we've seen the PAC report, now we have the SEN reform agenda, and I think often the evidence and the briefings that we get, if you took everything that was on paper, it sounds like everything's great, it's going really well, and we know that that's not the case. What's really happening at the coal face of this is the lit teams right now, so I wanted to ask you around that. So how much of the 27.5 million of the transformation monies is being spent on those lit teams?
None as such has been spent on the lit teams at this point in time.
They're already being funded through the EA's block grant.
Okay, so how much of is being invested in the lit teams from the EA's block grant?
I don't have the precise figure. Do you, Janis?
All I can look back to is 24-25. So in 24-25, it was pupil support services. They had the individual pupil support services, and that was around 33 million.
Last week, I got the impression that the biggest part of that money was going into the lit teams, but you're saying none of that money is going into the lit teams?
No.
So then, in terms of the expertise then that's coming into those teams, I met with the Senko group last week, and they're amazing. Obviously, I have to say they're very concerned about some of the narratives that are going out from the department around schools not stepping up. That was said in the context of placements, and that was upsetting because placements is one issue, and schools shouldn't be judged on their contribution to special educational needs on whether they have a SPIM or not. So these professionals are there now dealing with this, they're at the front line of this, and they were really upset to think that that's how their contribution is being dismissed. It comes to the experience of these guys. They have a concern, and the level of expertise going into the lit teams perhaps isn't what it ought to be. And I have a particular concern, again, leading on from this kind of narratives that goes out, and this is based on some of the information that they gave me, is that what this will come down to at the end is presenting numbers. And Ron, I think you've already said in terms of the placements, it's all about the numbers. That's
the challenge was about the numbers.
Well, the challenge is about getting kids a proper education and appropriately placed. And I think when you just talk about the numbers and you just talk about who gets placed, you miss that really important bit of it. So I think what the concern here is with this is that we're going to end up talking about numbers again and not whether the outcomes are what we want them to be. So the example that they used was a child needing support around literacy and eventually getting through the system, and the support that they got back was some printouts off the computer. And they're like, well, you know, I could do that myself. I didn't need a lit team. But the concern being that that kid then comes off the statistics because they got those printouts delivered to them. Mm-hmm. But to say that kid got a proper intervention and they're being helped would be dubious to say that that's what's happening. They had other examples of perhaps, again, these are professionals with 30 years experience, have a newly qualified teacher giving them advice. They're like, again, I think I probably know more than they do, and feeling, is this really the expertise that we're getting in these lit teams? Another example that they had was they told them what their plan of action was, and they went to get advice and validation, and they were told, well, I don't think we could give you any better advice than you have, good luck. And that was the level of advice and intervention they were getting. So I think what we want to understand is, will these lit teams add value in terms of the outcomes for the kids, or are we going to get to a situation again like placements where all we talk about is the numbers?
I mean, maybe if I could answer part of that, and then Janis might unpack some of the detail. I mean, first of all, I think it's important to say, you know, I very much regret if people out there felt that the narrative of the department was in any way negative. I mean, we have nothing but admiration for the staff who are working in schools and school principals. I think they're in a very difficult position, and I do think they're doing the best they can. I think what we're trying to say is it is important that we engage with schools around specialist provision, and it's important that we get the opportunity to do that as early in the year as possible. And I welcome the intervention from Graham Galt. I think we're now in a much better place, and I think we can move forward with that. On your point about the numbers, I absolutely agree. It's not about numbers, it's about the children. I suppose I'm using the numbers as a context to the scale of what we're trying to do, but I'm not in any doubt, and my colleagues aren't in any doubt, that every one of those 1,374 are individual children and are important, and we need to do the best we can for them, and we need to do better for them. We're not shying away from that. In terms of the lit teams, I think it is early days in terms of the establishment of them. I do believe there is the potential there to really make a difference, but I don't underestimate the scale of the challenge that they're going to face.
And I think maybe if I could just come in, Michelle, and you know, certainly we know that, you know, I think to suggest that a school only provides for special educational needs if they have a specialist provision, when we know that 84% of children with special educational needs are in our mainstream schools.
Absolutely,
so 20%
was so disappointing, and that came from the department. Like,
so
that's not something that was imagined.
So I think, you know, 20% of children have special educational needs, and they're in every classroom in every single school, and nobody would ever underestimate the value, especially that Senkos do, and all class teachers and classroom assistants. We speak to Senkos on a regular basis too, and throughout the end-to-end review, in the interest of transparency, we heard similar concerns, and that's really disappointing. But as Ronnie said, you know, lits are only starting out, and if I could come in just on the numbers versus outcomes, I think that's why when we look at the enabling actions, and a lot of people may just refer to that as producing documents, the enabling actions under that delivery plan to set out the outcomes that we want, which were very much based on what people told us they wanted, and the issues that we saw throughout the end-to-end review, the lack of trust, the lack of confidence from parents, the lack of feeling of belonging and inclusion in children, the trust in the system, even in our workforce. That's why we've set the outcomes out in the way that we have. So what underpins all of the data that will come back? Yes,
really good stuff in
it
there,
will be
Janis.
numbers,
It's whether
but it's in the context
Yeah.
of outcomes. So for children getting an intervention, whether that's through the local impact teams, whether that's through one of the 13 projects under the transformation fund that we have, we will know the outcomes for each of the children that are, I don't want to say subject to that intervention, but a participant on that intervention. That's why we've set the outcomes framework out in the way that we have. So at a population level, we'll be able to look at how parents are feeling, how our workforce is feeling, how our children are feeling, and how the system is feeling. But also, for each intervention that we make, we will know how those children, or if those children were better off, and we'll know quickly, and we will be able to do something.
I do
about
think
it.
there's the right ideas in here, and I look forward to seeing that come out. I really do. But do you think you're putting in those teams the level of expertise that is going to match the needs of the kids?
That's a work in progress, if I'm honest with you.
The two things are obviously linked.
Yeah, no, look, I think to be perfectly honest, that's a work in progress, but I'm optimistic that we will make significant progress. I think the opportunities, the information that Janis has just outlined, I think is a real positive, and I think we'll see quickly as to whether or not these things
We're capturing data right now actively.
Are working.
So as each intervention is lifted up, we will start to capture those data. That's the plan. Best laid plans, but that's the plan. In terms of the outcomes at a
Succinctly,
population,
please, Janis.
at a population level, that will require large scale surveys. So we have those surveys in design at the moment. EA have a survey in the field about their own services, so we'll look forward to those data coming through. It would be remiss of us to release more surveys on people. As a former statistician, I can't burden people with too many surveys, so we need to let that EA survey finish and we'll then lift up our population surveys.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Danny?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I suppose we're going to start off with, Ronnie, you said it's about children. The devil's in the detail here. Placements, it was an absolute disaster because there's hundreds of children right now are not in school because their place isn't ready. So my question to you is, how many mainstream children were offered a place and are sitting at home right now waiting for that place to be built?
Well, my understanding from the latest statistics I had from EA was there are 80 children who are not yet able to avail of a full-time place. Yep.
All of additional needs?
Yes.
How many mainstream?
I don't have that figure, but
I don't have that.
Well, see, this is my problem.
Right.
This is it. It's acceptable to leave children with additional needs sitting at home, but it's not acceptable for mainstream. That's the problem. That's what you aren't getting your heads around when you're talking about numbers.
It's absolutely not acceptable.
Well, but it's happening, and it's happening.
I understand.
Ronnie,
I understand it's happening.
To be fair, Ronnie, you started off by saying that it was an improvement. I'm just pointing out to you how much it's not an improvement.
Well, I
that's
think
what it needs to be
year on
needed.
year, what I'm saying to you is year on year there has been improvement. It's not acceptable
It's not year
that
on year
80
improvement.
children
That's
are...
the same as last year.
It's not acceptable that 80 children are waiting for a full-time placement. I'm not shying away
See, that
from
happened last year, and then we're the same children who are not going to be placed in the right setting. We're going to end up in reduced timetables. I'm already dealing with ones who are on reduced timetables already. So my point is the EA and the department are fundamentally getting the operational side of it wrong.
Well, I don't think it's right to say we're fundamentally getting the operational side of it wrong. I think we're trying to...
We weren't getting it wrong.
We are trying to ensure that we have the places available and ready. But I think the challenge that we faced was that we were still working, towards the end of the last term to try and secure those places. When those places
but you were too late. That was too late.
I'm not arguing that we weren't.
I don't want to waste all my time on just that. I just made that point. I wasn't going to talk about placements, but I wanted to make that point because how you betrayed it to the first start of the questions. It's not better than the year before or the year before it. In fact, this year was probably worse.
Just for information, Ronnie, the autism reviewer was in with us last week, and she says she knows of hundreds of children who are still sitting at home, despite the fact that the figures coming from the EA and the department it's just 80. So
Well, certainly, I mean, in the information I've received from EA, the department received, is that it's 80. I absolutely accept.
It's the invisible children she was referring to, and that's children who get placed in a school, but then that is not then held. And I'm just going to move on, and I'll quickly just touch on this here, and it's a transport side of it, because then there was the knock-on effect. When you don't place children in appropriate time, then there's going to be transport issues. But here's my question to you. How much investments went into the IT system for transport? Are they still working off a pen and paper?
Couldn't give you the statistic on that in terms of what EA have spent, but
do they have an IT system that is adequate to deal with mapping out, for example, or correlating all the data correctly?
My understanding is, sorry,
Are they
Janis.
working off pen and paper?
I think there might be a review ongoing at the minute, but I
A
know
review.
that
So
there
you can
has
see where
been
it
some
kind of comes into prioritising.
mapping done in that area.
Okay,
I think
so
we're working with LPS.
could you confirm when the new SEN regulations and code of practice will be presented to the Assembly for scrutiny?
We're working on the regulations. We are
Yeah.
due to have them by the end of the
Calendar
year.
We would hope.
Would you be surprised me if I again not taking that on trust? But I wrote to the Minister on the 13th of March 2024 in a written question, and the Minister told me that they would be drafted. They're in the final stages of being drafted, March 24. So
Well,
we're now waiting to another end of calendar.
I think what we're now saying to you is that on the timescale that we're currently working,
Yeah.
they will be ready by the end of the calendar year, and obviously the committee will have an opportunity to consider those. I mean, again, and this is not about making excuses, but we have to face the reality of the pressures within the department to do all that we're trying to do. And I'm not suggesting that these things aren't important, but
further delays to this and implementing new SEN regulations and code of practice means the efforts to transform SEN provision are inhibited.
But I think we're now collectively, with all that we're doing, in a much better place in terms of the committee can hold us to account for these things. I mean,
we're trying
I'm clearly,
our best, but every time we seem to do it, the goalposts are always moved.
well, I'm clearly saying that the regulations will be ready by the end of the calendar year. So
Right, okay, can we move on to then? Can you outline the proportional statements of SEN that are currently issued outside the current 26-week framework?
Deirdre, do you have that precise figure?
Not the precise figure. I think it's over 50. I think it's high. It's very high.
About 49.
So it wouldn't surprise you that I sat down with a SEN code just last week, and within her school, and she's doing 3 roles really.
Yeah.
There is 41 children that she's supporting, but only 16 of them have that support because of the delays.
Yeah.
That's right now happening.
Yeah.
So again, it brings me back to how are we in a better position than we were last year or the year before? Because it seems to me it's getting worse.
Well, I think what we have now from the Minister published is delivery plan and his action plan.
Part of his delivery plan is to bring it down to 22 weeks. So
yes, and we're
you have to be very sceptical. If we can't sit within the 26 weeks, how are we going to get to the 22 weeks? This is just words on a page that sounds good on a soundbite, really, from the Minister.
Well,
he's been in post long enough.
No, I don't. It's not just words on a page. I think there is a genuine intention to work towards that. But nobody is suggesting that these things are easy. We're not.
If you prioritise it, you should see improvements. We're not seeing improvements, is my point. And I've just laid out 3 things. We had placements, transport, regulations, and I'm talking about statements. 4 major issues that parents and school leaders come up against, and we've seen no improvement.
Well, I think we need to be judged by what we're now committing to through the delivery plan and the action plan.
Okay, so I'll have the judges maybe next year. So I'll make my last question. Sorry, Chair. Can I just make
please, Donna.
Because since we'll judge on the year, because I'll probably have to ask this question of Janis again next year. An inclusion policy, where are we?
Yes. So we have some work going with the European agency. So I don't think, to be fair, Danny, inclusion isn't necessarily a policy, it's a practice. It's what happens in our classrooms, it's what happens in our corridors, and it's what happens
with all
in
what's happening and we're going on.
So
should we not have a policy?
Okay, so in the legislation and the code of practice, there is a presumption of mainstream, right? What we're doing with the European agency, they have done quite a bit of work under a technical support instrument for us to look at our entire system legislatively. So how inclusive is our legislation? and then looking right across education, not just in special educational needs, right across every policy in the department to look at how inclusive is our current policy, whether it's youth policy or school improvement policy or admissions policy or area planning
when do we
policy.
expect to see this?
So they've done quite a piece of work. The next stage of that is now back with the technical support instrument team who are putting together a country policy systems development piece for us. From there, we will then need to take a piece to the minister because it'll need to be approved by the minister. So how long is that going to take, Danny? I don't know. But we're very reliant on our colleagues in the European Agency. And to be fair, you know, this is something that we're getting from the European Agency gratis. You know, this isn't costing money. If we were to take this out to do it ourselves as policymakers in the department, it could take a really long time. We've actually got the expertise sitting in those 36 jurisdictions. It's a team of 6 people working on this with us across Europe. So I look forward to that report coming back to us. EA have fed in heavily. Every policy area in the department has fed in heavily. We'll see what that brings back, what gaps it has, and it looks, as I said, from legislation to policy to implementation and operationalisation of the policy. So it's quite a big piece of work. In the meantime, under the transformation funding that we've got, we will be doing a project around inclusive capacity building, already acknowledging a lot of our schools are very inclusive in terms of what they do, but there's a piece there that, again, people have told us they would like more training, they'd like more capacity building, and we'll stand that up under the transformation.
Okay, thanks, Danny. Thank you. John?
Thanks, Ronnie, for that. Thanks for all the hard work yourselves and the EA do, because I think whilst the numbers are unacceptable, there is a direction of travel that has improved. I think that's the summary. But there are still problems. Now, I got some figures that 4,648 pupils rely on taxi services a year came from your department, with the longest return journey of 2 hours 40 minutes.
Yep.
So I suppose I just want to put it on the record that if a child's spending 2 hours 40 minutes on the road, they're probably having to get up earlier, less time for extracurricular activities, less sleep, less time with their family. It has a major impact on their life. So I think we all accept that's unacceptable.
Absolutely.
Now, just want to come back to the value for money aspect of that. That's why I put the unacceptability of it out first. In terms of the value for money aspect, when we say 4,648 children rely on taxis, on any given day, are any of those taxis shared between children who are going? So if there's 3 children in my development who mightn't know each other, but they're all going roughly the same place, or exactly the same place, or one's passing through to another place, is that system joined up to make sure that taxi is bringing all 3 or not?
I couldn't comment on the specifics because I simply don't know that. I would have thought so, but I couldn't give you a cast iron guarantee on that.
Not necessarily. That may not be the case. And again, that's operational data that the Education Authority would have access to. Anecdotally, I would be aware that yes, some children do share taxis, whether they're maybe siblings or they're living in the same area. I don't have that granular detail.
To take out the siblings of the figure, but I think there's potentially a massive saving here. It can be coordinated because, of course, if the person is vetted, there's no difficulty with 3 children being in the same cab because 6, 10, 12 children share the same bus. Is that something that
I suppose we'd also have to look at the needs of the individual children, of course.
Needs individualised, but there was a potential there, especially when we're talking about 20% of children who have special education needs. There's a potential for a saving, especially with use of technology. Because of the scale of this, you're almost now into like a taxi coordinator actually trying to model. I mean, this is huge.
It is. It's massive.
Right, until we get to... So that's the first thing is, I think if it's looked at, we could save potentially money. The second thing I have on that is, leaving aside, some people won't like this question, right? But I ask just questions without judgment. Are there people whose children would get a lift to school with a taxi who are also in receipt of higher level PIP mobility car because their child has special education needs?
I have asked for information, because this again is something that would come back anecdotally. The first thing I would say is that mobility car doesn't come with a driver. So I've asked the Department for Communities if we can have a look at this. And while the statisticians there have been really helpful in providing lots and lots of information, they can't answer that question for me.
It just strikes me as one aspect that just slightly troubles me. That if the car is provided for the child effectively to be able to be mobile, but the car's sitting when the child's taken to, there just seems to be an issue there that needs quantified, but you're telling me it's been looked at and it's not easy to get data.
Because the data on the mobility scheme sits with the Department for Communities. The data on statementing and transport sits with the EA. It's very difficult to join those data. Yeah. And it's even difficult for statisticians in the Department for Communities, and I've had several meetings on this with them, if anything, to bust that myth. To see can we
any judgment.
Can we find out the size and scale of this before we spend time on it? But they're unable to answer that question for me.
I think that's the value of asking questions that can be seen as controversial. You're actually just trying to get facts. Because it's put to me by several people, and I want to be able to go back and either say, well, actually, there's something in this that there's not.
And look, we hear those anecdotes, as Janis said as well. I mean, it's a perfectly legitimate question to ask. Unfortunately, we're not, much as we would like to, we're not in a position to give that answer.
We're a wee small country, so two departments should be able to extract data in some way. I mean, I know it's difficult, but I mean, it's
legislative barriers there in terms of the way that our legislation's set up. It can't always be shared, and individuals actually can't always be identified and matched.
I understand that. Let me ask this of two more questions. One of it is an easy one, in the sense not in any way controversial, around male teachers. I have a real concern about the lack of male teachers. I think it's not healthy for our young people. Now, I asked a question to the Minister, what are the obstacles and barriers to males joining the teaching profession? He answered me, I think he's misinterpreting my question. Oh, there's no obstacles and barriers, we just need to encourage them. I'm not saying that there's any discrimination against men as such, or there's a physical barrier or a legal barrier, but there must be a cultural barrier in our society, that the numbers are simply stark, and it cannot be healthy for young men who need role models, people that understand and all of that. Is there any understanding or work being done to see how do we get more men into the profession? My old job in the police, by the way, if there was 90% males, there would be questions asked. And I think it's actually an important issue for society.
And more prevalent in the primary sector than in the post-primary sector. I mean, I suspect it is a cultural thing, but we don't have an answer to specifically why that is, why males are, I think, more attracted to go into the post-primary than the primary sector. But absolutely take your point in terms of role models. It is important, and I think we want to do everything we can.
And it shifted since I was at school, when there was lots of male teachers. I mean, it's 2 points. I think when we talk about role modelling in terms of violence against women and girls and showing good behaviours towards women, well, actually what you see at school is really important. But if you're not actually seeing good role models, and then educational entertainment of boys, you're actually then showing the value of good education. So I think it's an important bit of work that nobody should just think we're missing something. Okay.
The other final one is SEN, the numbers. Now, these are children, so we don't talk about numbers, but if the numbers are currently 20%, and they've increased over the last 5 years by what? What was it 5 years ago? Was it 10%? Are you modelling what it would be if the same increase occurs in the next 5 to 10 years? Or is there any indication that the increase is slowing down? Because if not, at what point do we say something can't be right? If 40, 60, 80, 90%, where does it end according to the model figures?
Yes, we've taken a look. So we have pupil population projections. The one thing that's difficult to project is actually, so we can project the figures on children that will require specialist provision classes. Yeah. We can project the figures on children that will require a special school. And it's difficult then to extract out the number of children that would require provision but would be in a mainstream class. But overall, we can project the figures. So our primary school population is in major decline, probably the biggest decline that we've seen in a number of decades. But that is not having an impact on the rise that we're seeing in children presenting with special educational needs. If we take those projections on a ceteris paribus basis, so if we do nothing,
that's my,
and everything else remains the same, if we don't do any transformation, we don't do anything, It's now sitting at 20%. It could go up towards that 40% mark in the next maybe 10 to 15 years. So we are looking at, it is on an exponential rise at the moment. If we don't intercept that and do something differently in terms of supporting our children, it's going to continue to rise exponentially. Now, there's a lot of caveats around that,
100%.
but yes, I have
certainly worth
modelled
being
that to see where that's
aware.
going.
And there's it's an issue that it becomes controversial. When I raised it in the first committee meeting here, it was that we just have to accept whoever is saying, and if the numbers keep going up and up and up and up, you just have to deal with what you deal with. Whereas I have to say, as a society, there has to be a reason why. There is some genetics, but something is driving up the level of SEN, whether it's mobile phones and that can affect certain things like ADHD or make them worse. I just think we need honest conversations about this. Otherwise, we're going to have a generation of children where half, 60% are SEN. I mean, that
I think you're absolutely right, and it's not just here, of course, as you're alluding to. This is happening well beyond this, beyond these islands.
I think we need an
I
appetite.
make a point. Sorry, Chair. I think it's really dangerous what we're saying here, and especially the week that we've just had, with a lot of misinformation coming from Donald Trump around children with autism. We need to be very clear that the population of children, or anybody with additional needs, has not actually changed. It's that there's more data collection around that, there's more children now getting into the system.
Diagnosis is one factor.
Yeah. No, but you need to be very careful what you're saying.
Through the chair, please.
Sorry, and we are trying to be careful and ask the questions.
I'm sorry to get me.
Okay. Are you finished, John?
I am finished, but they were carefully asked questions, and the Hansard will reflect that.
Okay. Yeah, but
Thanks, Chair. I would just say I concur with John on that. I mean, I'm not pushing a Trump agenda on this. I don't have an answer. I would like an answer. I hear from some that there is no answers, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a cause that we haven't found yet. I mean, it seems to me that from some quarters, strangely, to be the only medical issue that we have that nobody wants to find, or not nobody, but some quarters don't want to find a reason for it. This is not about stigmatising anybody. This is just about trying to find if there's a reason. I mean, if there's something that's there and there's nothing we can do about it, that's fine, and we deal with it. But I mean, the lack of curiosity around this at times, I find really strange.
Well, Sweden done a big massive 2.5 million.
Yeah. Well, I just don't accept that it's only because we're identifying it more personally. But I mean, I'm open to hearing more. But I think we should always be inquisitive around these things. Could I just ask? You talked about, Danny was talking to you about the improvement year on year. You're saying that is those numbers have been improving year on year. I mean, improvement is just that. It's not saying things are perfect. It's saying that what we're doing. Are you confident that what we are seeing is an improvement year on year? Nothing perfect. Some within the system that are continue to be unacceptable, but we're seeing an improvement.
I think we are. I think we're certainly working much better, much closer with the EA to try and drive that. I think we have a strategic agenda set by the Minister that we're working to. I think he's holding us to account for what we're doing. Are we perfect? I think I answered in response to Mr. Baker, no. I think we're far from perfect. I think we need to do much better. But I think, not to get into the placement issues, but I think it's an example of how we do need to work right across the system better. It's not about, and it must never be about, blaming individuals for where we are. It's about how do we work better. And I think if we can work with the unions, if we can work with schools, if we can identify those places over the next couple of months that we need, then I think we can do even better next year around the placements and around having children in full-time education, so that we don't have a figure of 80. I can't guarantee that's where we'll be, but I think we want to work towards that.
I was going to come to that because even in my own constituency of East Belfast, I know anecdotally that Dundonald High, which I talk about often here, is seeing new classrooms go in. I know that the Minister has progressed plans to extend Greenwood Assessment Centre to allow them to take on a greater number of pupils and to move them to the old Elmgrove site,
Yep.
which I think is great news and being welcomed in the constituency. Are we confident that those measures that the Minister is determined to take in the short term, not just the medium and long term, are going to see improvement in coming years?
Yes, I do believe those measures are going to deliver improvement in recent years. But those things alone won't be, and I know you're not suggesting they are, but they won't be enough. We will still need to do more.
And this, of course, has to be an executive priority.
Absolutely.
And would it be fair to say that the Minister and the Department could do more and do more quickly if the Executive and the Finance Minister was able to release the funds to allow that to happen?
I think there is no doubt, there's an executive commitment here. So the Minister has brought forward his capital paper to the Executive. He will shortly bring forward a resource paper in terms of the funding we need to drive forward. There is no question if we had additional funding, we could do more and we could do it quicker.
So there is the challenge to the Finance Minister and the Executive that those who want to make this a priority, who care about delivering the change in SEN education, need to put their money where their mouth is. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, and Cathy?
Thanks, Chair. I just want to go back to Michelle was talking there about Senkos. And we were told that the Educational Psychology Service Review was going to reduce the workload of Senkos. I had lots and lots of phone calls from Senkos following that discussion. And this is a genuine question, what aspects of the new process is taking workload off Senkos?
Do you want me to go in first?
Go ahead, Janis.
I mean, if I could talk probably, and then Deirdre maybe want to come in on the review of the EdPsych model and the time allocation model and things like that. So in terms of local impact teams, previously a Senko would have had to make maybe 10 different referrals to different services for one child, could have made 8 referrals for another child. That now is one single referral. So from an administrative point of view, there's less of an admin load there for the Senko. And then probably another thing that I think will really help, and it maybe touches on a couple of other questions, the digitisation of the statementing process I think is really important, because if you think about the number of parents and children that are in that process, it's a 26-month process, it's very long. A lot of those queries and questions are coming in to Senkos in schools. Where's it at? Where's the case at? The digitisation of that statement and process and the EA Connect portal will actually make that information visible to parents, so there should be a reduced workload there for Senkos, that they won't be getting the same queries coming in. I don't know, Deirdre, if you want to say something about the time allocation model and the change on the educational psychology service.
Yes, so schools continue to be allocated a number of hours for educational psychology time, and there has been an uplift in the number of educational psychologists recruited over the last while, along with higher numbers of psychology assistants and assistant psychologists, because we know there is generally a shortage just in the workforce right across, so trying to divvy up roles so that skills are used appropriately at the right level of complexity.
So can I just, so are educational psychologists' hours being reduced because of workforce or because of this new review?
No, the hours are not being.
It's not going to be in an hours basis.
No, it's not. No.
So why are school leaders and Senko saying that they are seeing less and less of their educational psychologists, and their educational psychologists are saying that they're not going to see them the same amount as they have been? Again, a genuine question.
Maybe a wee bit of a nuanced. I know I'm not meant to ask questions back, but I know that the educational psychologists have changed with the lit boundaries coming in. So some schools may have had the same educational linked psychologists for years. And I know that's
those ed psychs now looking after more schools.
So the ed psych is moving, and they're getting a different educational psychologist because they're in a different lit area.
It's not about more, it's about different, is what you're saying.
They've moved to match the trust boundaries to make things easier in working with other allied health professionals. So my understanding is they've moved to match trust boundaries.
So, and Janis, you said you have spoke to Senkos. Are you not hearing this? Are you not hearing it from them? I had a meeting with a group of Senkos, And these are, some of my colleagues were with me, and I've just jotted down from the meeting some of the terminology that was used. They're exhausted, they're undervalued, they're getting blamed, they're questioning their career, they're completely forgotten about, they're feeling patronised, and that was following the discussion that was here with department officials the last time, and they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. Are you not hearing this?
Yeah, and we have there's an action in the delivery plan, Kathy, for that very reason, because when we spoke to Senkos at the time, I think my sense was, on speaking to Senkos, they do an amazing job, but my sense was that the job had become more about paperwork and administration than what they signed up for.
While they're still trying to look after the children in the classroom.
Yes. So, not all Senkos are teaching Senkos. Some, they all have time off timetable, but some are full-time Senkos.
And see those who are full-time Senkos, because they are still being called on because of the complex behavioural issues that they're having in class. They're still being called on, even if they're not teaching.
So that's why we have that line in the delivery plan about looking at the role of Senkos.
But I think in answer to your question, yes, we are hearing that.
Except that there's a line in the delivery plan.
No, I know.
Senkos, that doesn't mean anything to them. That means absolutely nothing. That's words on a page to them. What communication is being done? Like, don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. That's pretty stark. Well, how do we give these Senkos the confidence that this is going to work? Because they're not saying it at the minute.
Well, I think we have to demonstrate through our actions that there is change coming. I think elections are at a very early stage. I think we are hopeful that will deliver change. But I absolutely accept that Senko's do an amazing job. I think we've nothing but the highest regard for them. And I do hear the things that you're saying. But it's not just about a line in an action plan. But that is important. It's about how we deliver this forward.
Okay. I want to move on. The PAC report mentioned about early intervention, the importance of it, but said that there's not enough focus, or there wasn't enough focus on it. Just in a sentence, because I hear early intervention all the time sometimes, and it drives me mad. It sounds like a buzzword. What does early intervention mean to you?
For us in special, for us in special educational needs, early intervention it's not just in the early years, but early intervention is actually stepping in at the point at which need is identified. Kathy, it's we've always talked about the Minister's reform agenda. The whole premise of that agenda is shifting everything left. At the minute, we know parents feel that their only recourse to get any support for a child is getting a statement, and they're spending a really long time trying to get that statement, and then when they do get that statement, it doesn't necessarily provide everything that they thought was going to come by way of support. So there's a suite of early intervention projects that are under that transformation fund that we've got. There's a suite of early intervention projects there, and that's looking at before children come to school, first of all, in the very early years. And stepping in there. It's also looking at children in preschool. We already have the preschool inclusion fund that's out there that we managed to get some funding from the early learning and childcare funding last year. That was 1.2 million we put out to preschools, and look, I haven't been around a number of our preschools. They have said it has been really, really positive. We're stepping up an evaluation on that in October, and we've secured another 3 million now, that we hope to be able to put out for the preschool inclusion fund. So it's getting in the early years, right? Recognising that before school, needs are not always identified. In preschool, that 1:13 ratio, had 2 adults in the class, 26 children. There'll be children there with special educational needs that haven't been identified, and just supporting that child is very difficult in that environment. So putting that extra little bit of funding in there for preschools to be able to support those children in whatever way they see fit. And then for school age children, it's looking at the speech, language and communication needs, and how we can look at sort of in-school support and what that looks like. So we have a suite of 5 early intervention projects, and that's what we mean, looking at preschool, preschool and the early years in school, and configuring what the best model of support would be.
And there is certainly overlap here between the work we're doing around SEN and the early learning and childcare strategy. So some of the initiatives that Janis is referring to, things like the Fair Play Grant Scheme that is a DOH programme that's been driven forward, the Bright Start grant scheme for children with additional needs and disability.
And Ronnie, I take all that on board, but again, when we talk to preschools and we talk to childcare providers, not all of them get those grants.
Yeah.
Not all of them are, there's a limited amount that can, and there are, like when we get into the preschool discussion, there's a lot of issues around preschool as well. So are we going to see this when the childcare and early learning strategy does come along? Are we going to see this as a main focus in how we get in there? And like a lot of this can be identified from birth, pre-birth as well. What's been done in conjunction with the Department of Health in this?
Yes, it'll certainly be a focus of the strategy when that comes forward. As I said earlier, we are working in health, and it's one of the areas that we've identified as a need from health. But the reality there is that there are significant resource challenges for health as well. So it's an issue that we will be taking forward in discussion with the Department of Health.
Okay, sure.
Thank you. Just one final question from me, Ronnie. Recommendation 7 in the PAC report expects decisions by EA to be robust and able to withstand challenge. As a matter of urgency, the issues leading to the increase in the number of appeals and the reasoning as to why the EA concedes so many needs to be understood. And it says this recommendation is complete. Now, I heard from the Children's Law Centre not that long ago that the EA were conceding 97% of appeals. Can you give us any idea?
I didn't think the figure was as high as 90%. I think it's around 80%. I'm not saying that's better, but I think in terms of accuracy, I think it's probably around 80. Around 80% is the latest figure
and to sort of give a rationale for that extremely high number of appeals that were being conceded is that, and certainly the Children's Law Centre felt this, that the EA were refusing to give the proper support to children to allow them to have statements in the hope basically that the parents would go away. And in many cases that does happen, that some parents don't have the stamina to progress through the bureaucracy that exists, and it's only when they receive help from organisations like the Children's Law Centre they do get that support. So that's an area that we will be keeping an eye on.
Okay.
And just finally, we were in here at the outset, we talked about value for money and the inability of your department, Ronnie, and the EA to demonstrate value for money. And we heard a number of examples, and John raised the example of all the taxis and so on and so forth. Yet still, there's this ask for more money. Give us more money. Give us more money. And nobody can demonstrate that we're getting value for money for the hundreds of millions of pounds that are being poured into the department and the EA. So I'll leave you with that thought, and hopefully the next time you're in, we can talk about really concrete examples of how the public out there, the taxpayer, are getting value for money for all that money that's being spent. So thank you all for your time here today. You're welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Oh, a wee bit more.
I'm going to text the opposite.
You got it.
Okay, I'll ask the clerk again to speak to any actions or so on coming out of that particular session.
So, members, it's just such a lot of information that you've been served up. I was just going to propose that some of the issues highlighted for interrogation in the research report might usefully be sent for reply to the department, just to cover some of the issues that we didn't have time for today.
Yes, Michelle.
I don't know how to put it, or if it's the right place, it's time to put it. I really want to make sure that the inquiry is focused. And I think we've had a session today, and maybe a session last week as well, where everybody's asked everything. I think we're looking like we're going to have a session next week where it's going to be the same. I missed last week when we talked about the work programme, that we're going to just do this every week, the inquiry. I thought, like, you've obviously got a real interest in transport, a focus session on transport or connected to these right place, right support. I thought that's the structure that this was going to be. We can't have sessions like this every week. We're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to learn anything. We can't have just the same questions every week, but with different people. We have to have different conversations with the same people potentially, but it has to be focused. There's obviously an interest here as well in causation or why are things increasing. And I'm not saying we don't have those conversations, but I think we have to be sensitive in the sense that, yes, there was conversations on helpful, not evidence-based information coming out of the US this week, which was focused on autism. But when we talk about special educational needs, we're not just talking about autism. There's a full spectrum of conditions that take up what that means. And I think it would be helpful if we went to the department and asked, what is the umbrella? Under that umbrella of special educational needs and disability even, what are we talking about? What are the different conditions? And where are the growth areas within that? The evidence I was getting from Sankos is the growth areas actually in emotional and well-being kind of, and maybe behavioural. So, but that's anecdotal, but I would like to know what that is. And I think that will be helpful to us if we want to have a discussion on that as a topic within the inquiry, that we have the proper data in front of us. So we're not just, because of the sensitivities with that in particular, that we're not just throwing a wee bit here and a wee bit there, and then it could be construed the wrong way, and it could be damaging, it could be hurtful. We just want to be talking about these things with clarity and with facts. And again, can I just say, having people last week as well and this week who are senior officials who don't know what anything costs, what money's going into anything, how much, don't know, how many, don't know. Again, we want people to brief us, and we said we want people to come to us with what's the money, what's the resource. So I can't believe I could ask a question about how much you spend. I don't know. Like, people do know. They do know the answer to these questions, but they're not telling us. Or we wouldn't ask for the right information coming into it. So I don't want to say this every week, but I feel like I've said it already, and I'm going to say it again today. This is such an important inquiry. It has to have value. It has to get into the issues, and we can't just have these free-for-alls every week. We just can't. Sorry, that's a bit of a rant in the end, but I just feel really strongly that this is such an important issue. We have to do it justice to it.
Can you articulate an action that you want to come out of
Well,
that?
the action is actually, that was a general, I understand, but around what are the different conditions that are under the umbrella of SEND or SEND? Just if we could get clarity from the department what that looks like, and if there's any particular areas where the growth, we talk about growth generally, there is a growth, can we break that down into where the growth is in those areas? And I think that will be a useful baseline to help us if we get into any other discussions of just what we're talking about when we talk about SEND. Does that make sense? Did I explain that right?
Yeah.
John and then David. Or sorry, Clark, did you want to come out?
Just that the committee agreed last week to ask EA for some, population data, and we can certainly ask for that as well. The first 2 weeks are at a governance level, so it is really kind of, what has happened since 2021. So it is more high level, and then, the committee agreed to take more detailed, subsections of EA and DE after that, which we can talk about for our programme. Thank you.
Yeah, no, Chair, I think that would be a good idea. And you have those sub-themes like transport, so then the witnesses are coming down prepared, having thought about these things. And then we can ask all the questions on that, because I think it's a massive issue for both the well-being of the children as well as the cost. And then we can box off some of those issues just to make sure there's no risks around our vetting process for our drivers and things. And that's not in any way malign our taxi drivers, just it's due diligence with the amount that is happening. I agree with that recommendation of sub-themes, and to get that data broken down into component parts of SEND.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, I think it is one of the things we, in terms of the Democratic Scrutiny Committee, often send the questions that we most, because it is quite technical, we send questions in advance that we're likely to ask, or if members have expressed an interest in. Now, I'm not precluding that people will want to come and ask the questions in a committee and a scrutiny forum. I'm not taking away from that at all. Sometimes it's frustrating to have had them produced in that way. But I think if there's technical things that we not want numbers to, and we fear that they might not have them when we get there, it might be something that the clerk can forward to the department so that they do know in terms of session. The other thing I would say, and again, not looking to get in discussion, is I think today's the second time, and I understand why, but there's a presumption actually when we ask about that issue around causation And I accept, having read more about it than I probably have, more this week than I had previously, that largely there's a thought that there isn't there's no solid answer to it yet, and I accept that. I don't accept we'll never get to an answer, but there's one at the minute. This is not coming, certainly from my point of view, and I actually would say, I can't speak for John, but I would say for John as well, this is not coming from a, Trump or any other agenda. This is just about, our own inquisitiveness on this and trying to understand what we're dealing with, because we're not all experts in any particular field here, so it's trying to understand more. I just want to put that on the record just in general. Certainly when I ask around that issue, it's not coming from any particular place. I understand there's a lot of politics in the room and so on, and we can see each other in particular ways, but for the record, that's my position. I'm very sceptical about what's been put out there this week. I'm not a scientist, but...
Yeah, and I think the chair laid it out really well. I don't know if it was last week or the week before, the terms that we should be aiming towards, because I'm only saying that around the why doesn't really matter with what we're trying to do. If we want to get a child-centred approach to this to make it better, improvements, and we're education, obviously we want to see it in health and right through all of their lives, but as an education side of it, I think like today it is unhelpful when you start the question. I wasn't even going to ask questions on placements or because we've done it. It's a fact that there's not that acceptance from senior officials that there's stuff even this year, it wasn't better than the year before. They're just not accepting that, and I think that's what we need to get down the crux of the report. So I agree with Michelle, it needs to be very, very centred and not go off on tangents.
Okay, everybody's had their say. Any actions out of that, Clark?
We have the EA, we're inviting them for the 5th and the 19th of November. Some of the main topics that were envisaged in the discussions about terms of reference were transport, statementing, pupil support services and workforce. Is there a prioritisation that you would like to hear those in? Would you want to hear transport first or statementing first? Just to help them.
It's all valid, yeah.
Whatever.
Okay,
if they've
so
got an
I'll just
expert in
divide
transport, get them in.
Okay.
Fair enough. Okay, we'll move on to item number 8, the agenda correspondence. Refer members to pages 112 to 171. We have 6 items provided under correspondence. Summary notes included at page 112. Item 8.2 on page 113 is correspondence from the Finance Committee regarding a response from Nikki in relation to Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill. Nikki has recommended that the Department undertakes a screening and, if required, conduct a child rights assessment on the relevant clauses of the bill to ascertain any impact on the children's rights that particular clauses may have, and seek members' views on that. Okay.
So I've checked that it's not something for the Assembly to do. It's not something for our legal services or anything. It would be a recommendation for the department to carry out a child's right impact. So members might want to forward the correspondence and highlight the Commissioner's proposal to the department.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay. Item 8.4 on page 126, correspondence from Cubby about its product. Ask members if they're content to note as commercial and forward the proposal of Cubby's in A and E to the Health Committee. Is this agreed? Agreed. 8.5 on page 129, an invitation to the Education for Sustainable Development Forum Conference on 2nd of October 2025. That's for members' diaries. If are members content to note?
Note.
Agreed. Yeah. 8.6 on page 131 is correspondence from the Assembly and Executive Review Committee seeking committee engagement on cross-cutting executive strategies. Would members like to request a written update from the Department of Education on shared strategies? Is that agreed? Agreed. 8.7 in the tabled papers is correspondence linking Generations NI, providing an update on its building and intergenerational NI proposal to the Department of Communities. The committee had previously written to the Education Minister regarding the work of LGNI, and the Minister had at that point indicated his intention to visit an LGNI project. Would members like to write to the Department of Education asking what it could do to support the work of LGNI on a cross-departmental basis? Members agree to that? Agreed. Are members content to dispose of correspondence as per the summary note at page 112? Agreed. Item number 9, forward work programme. I'll refer members to the draft forward work programme at page 245. I'll ask a clerk to speak to the forward work programme.
Sure. So we have firmed up some scheduling with the Department of updates on legislation that's imminent, and I would ask as well that anyone who's engaging with private members' bills just keep me apprised of your progress, because the committee will then ask for research and legal advice and all of that, and just get that into the schedule.
Not just take my word for it, no?
Sorry?
When I bring my bill forward, just take my word for it, just trust me. We would like to have a briefing on curriculum review from Lucy Crane, who came to the committee before, and also Christine Council, who's now beginning to implement that work in the department. And I'm just trying to firm up a date. That may be the 15th of October. By the 15th of October, I should also have some research that the committee asked for about Transform Ed. So that will fit in at least 15th of October and maybe later. Then we've got in kind of a bracket there on the informal side, school leaders on SENCO clusters. So members have helpfully given me some contact details for both categories of stakeholders who want to come either to the main meeting or the informal meetings, and we're just firming those up. On the 22nd of October, I hadn't scheduled anything else other than the Minister, but I've been given to understand that he only has an hour to come to be with the committee on that date. So just let me know if there's anything specific that you would like to hear in the stakeholder space on that day. And yeah, that's really all that I have that's new, everyone.
Michelle?
We don't get the Minister very often. We're having him for an hour. It feels a bit light. Is there another date he could come in and give us some more time, or can we have another session?
In addition, is it? Yeah.
If he only has an hour that day. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we don't see him very often, and I feel like, given everything that's going on, we're not going to get very far in an hour, are we?
The only thing I would say in response to that, Chair, is that last time we looked at this and the same narrative was pushed around, he doesn't come here very often. It compares similarly, if not favourably, to other ministers in other committees. So I'm happy to ask for another date if that's what the committee wants, but I just don't think we should be pushing the narrative necessarily that the Minister comes in frequently compared to any other minister in that regard.
Doing a comparison, I think it's an hour's not a
No,
lot of
no,
time.
it's fair. I accept the point. I just think
Chair, should be more than an hour.
Yeah, I mean, other committees can do what they do. As far as this committee is concerned, there are a lot of issues coming down the tracks at us. A lot of them are controversial, and you know, the Minister needs to give us more than just an hour. That's my view on it anyway.
I think as the Minister's asked for extra money too, I think there's an imperative that we're able to ask questions for more than an hour. It's a big lot of money, so which I've supported, but I think in principle we should be getting more than an hour.
Okay, so I'll ask for an additional date then.
Okay. Additional date or additional time, one or the other.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, item 10. Any other business? Can we endorse the forward work programme? Great.
I have one question. Who's Shine? You have Shine in there for the
autism group.
They're not as in charity, yeah,
Charity,
that Dan
brilliant.
recommended. So just one thing that has happened during the meeting is that I went back to the department to ask for a written briefing on the amendments, and the letter that has come over already is all that the department feels the need to provide. it's just there's not a lot of time for members to come to a committee decision on those amendments. And given how we fared in our short notice meeting this week, I'm just not sure how to proceed. Does anybody have a view on that?
Well, I definitely don't think there's time today to come to a committee position. We haven't had sufficient time to look at the amendments, and as I said earlier in the meeting, we would just be rushing for the sake of rushing to satisfy the department and the minister, and that isn't, in my view, proper scrutiny. So I think it's going to have to be the case that individual parties come to their own position in regard to these amendments. Unless someone...
The same difficulties of scheduling.
I made a point earlier on. I sense that that's the feeling of committee. So I mean, I've made a point earlier on.
Okay. Any other business from members? No. Item 11, date, time, place of next meeting. The next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, the 1st of October at 2 p.m, room 29, and via teleconference, Parliament buildings. All agreed, committee now adjourned?
Agreed.
Thanks, everyone.